Other people wake up as tigers or dragons in some other world. I wake up on a rooftop, soaked, staring at water in every direction. No land, no horizon line except the place where gray sky meets gray sea. And somewhere under my feet, 40 floors of concrete are creaking like a ship. I sit up. My head throbs. My clothes are wet, but not from rain. The air itself is heavy, salty, thick. I'm on some kind of running track, rubberized red, painted with lane numbers that mean nothing here anymore. Past it, a fenced tennis court, net sagging. A glass gym box, one wall cracked but standing. Beyond all of that, nothing. Ocean to the edge of the world. I remember blueprints. A desk. Rain against an office window late at night. Red pen marking load calculations on a steel frame. I remember being tired in a very specific, very human way, the tired of a man who has been staring at load-bearing walls for 6 years straight. Then nothing. A gap. Black. No date, no explanation, just me, a rooftop, and an ocean that shouldn't be there. I get up slowly. My legs work. That's something. I walk to the edge carefully, because falling 40 floors into water is still falling 40 floors, and look down. The building doesn't end where a building should end. Somewhere below the visible floors, it just goes into the water and keeps going, like an iceberg, like something built to float. The whole structure sways, a slow, patient roll, and every few seconds the concrete groans at the seams, not cracking, flexing, like it's designed to. That detail catches in my head and won't let go. Buildings aren't designed to flex like ships. This one is. I do the math a stranded person does automatically. The same math anyone does when the world stops making sense. What do I have and how long does it last? No food. No fresh water that I can see unless it rains, and it might, because the sky to the west is doing something ugly and gray. No phone signal, obviously. No idea who else is here, if anyone. I have maybe a few hours before that storm front reaches me, and if it's bad, I don't have real shelter beyond a locked gym door. Priority 1, don't die of thirst before I even get a chance to die of something more interesting. I walk the perimeter. The rooftop deck has drains, proper ones, sized for heavy rain, channeled toward what should be downspouts running the height of the building. That's not luck. Someone engineered this roof to shed a lot of water fast, which means somewhere below there's a cistern or a collection tank this system was built to feed. I find the access hatch near the gym wall, rusted but not sealed shut, and force it with a length of pipe. I pull off a dead exercise machine. Under the hatch, a narrow shaft, a ladder, and a smell of stagnant water rising up from somewhere far below. Good enough. If the storm hits and dumps rain on this roof, that shaft will carry it down into a tank instead of off the edge into the sea, assuming the tank isn't already full of salt water, assuming the storm doesn't wash straight past me, assuming a dozen things I can't check from here. I rig what I can. I find a tarp folded behind a maintenance locker, drag it to the drain closest to the hatch, weight the corners with loose pavers, and cut well, tear. Since I don't have a knife, a channel so runoff pools toward the opening instead of spreading across the deck. It's crude. It's also correct, and correct is what matters when you have 20 minutes before the sky opens up. The storm hits while I'm still tying off the last corner with a torn strip of gym mat. Rain like gravel. I get soaked worse than I already was, but I watch the water actually funnel where I told it to down through the hatch, and something in my chest unclenches for the first time since I opened my eyes on this roof. It's not survival. It's not safety. It's just proof that the world still obeys rules I understand, even here, even now. That's worth more than it should be. I wait out the worst of it under the gym's cracked overhang, arms around my knees, watching lightning flicker off water that goes on forever. My mind keeps circling back to the flex in the walls, the way the whole tower breathes with the swell instead of fighting it. A building this size, moving like that, and not tearing itself apart, that's not an accident of construction. That's a decision somebody made. I don't know who, or when, or why, but I know enough about structures to know intent when I see it holding something together. The storm passes faster than it arrived. By the time the sky lightens to a dull pewter, I'm cold, hungry, and alone with a roof, a rigged drain, and no idea what's underneath me besides 39 more floors and whatever's left of the people who used to live in them. That's when I hear it. Not wind, not the building settling. A voice distant, distorted by concrete and distance, but a voice, and then another answering it, sharp and short like an argument. It's coming from below, through the same shaft I forced open for the rain. I stand at the hatch a long time before I make myself move. Whoever's down there might be exactly like me, confused, scared, harmless. Or they might not be. I have no weapon beyond a bent pipe, and no way to know which it is until I climb down and find out. But staying on a rooftop with no food and a tarp full of rainwater isn't a plan, it's a delay, and delays don't feed anyone. I go down the ladder. 3 floors below, in a stairwell that used to serve executive apartments, a woman named Mia is kneeling over a man's torn hand, working a strip of curtain fabric into a bandage with hands that clearly know what they're doing because they don't shake. Around her, 11 people standing in the kind of loose half-circle strangers form when none of them has decided yet whether they're a group or just people who happen to be in the same stairwell. "We don't know what floor is safe," a man is saying, broad, solid, the kind of build that used to open doors for a living and still stands like it. "We don't know what's flooded. We don't know if there's anyone else in this thing, and until we do, nobody goes wandering off alone." "Nobody's arguing that, Takeru," Mia says without looking up from the bandage. "I'm saying we can't just sit in a stairwell forever either." A girl, maybe 12, sits apart from the rest with a dog curled against her side, mid-sized matted fur, a wound along one flank that's stopped bleeding but hasn't been looked at. The dog's ears are up, swiveling toward the stairwell door before anyone in the group reacts to anything. That's my first warning that someone's coming. The second is Takeru turning, already stepping in front of the others, one hand raised like he's about to catch something. I come through the doorway slow, hands visible, soaked to the skin, holding a bent pipe I have no intention of using unless I have to. "I'm not armed," I say, which is technically a lie since I am holding a metal pipe, but nobody corrects me. I woke up on the roof. I heard voices. The room takes a second to decide what to do with that. Takeru doesn't lower his stance, but he doesn't advance either. Mia glances up, sizes me in about 2 seconds soaked clothes, no visible injury, hands empty of intent even if not of metal, and goes back to the bandage. "Roof," she says. "You're not the first." That's how I learn the numbers, piece by piece, over the next hour, sitting on a stairwell landing while more people filter in from adjoining floors, drawn by voices the way I was. Somewhere around 70 people, scattered through a structure built for hundreds, maybe over 1,000. Everyone woke up alone, in a different room, on a different floor, with the same gap in their memory a life before, then black, then here. Nobody remembers arriving. Everybody remembers everything up until the moment they didn't. The girl with the dog is Hana. The dog doesn't have a name yet. She's been calling him nothing, like naming him would make the wound in his side more real. Mia was a nurse, in the life before. Takeru works security, and it shows in the way he's already positioned himself between the group and every doorway, whether anyone asked him to or not. "So, what's your trade?" Takeru asks me, not quite a question, more a measurement. Everyone here is good for something. Mia patches people up. I keep people from getting hurt in the first place. "What do you do?" I think about the roof, the drains, the flex in the walls that shouldn't hold together and does. "I build things," I say, or I used to. Structural engineer, load-bearing walls, that kind of work. Takeru's expression doesn't change much, but I catch the flicker a small, involuntary recalibration, filing me somewhere below himself on whatever scale he's using. Useful, maybe. Not useful in the ways that are going to matter first. He's not wrong, not yet. Right now what this room needs is water, food, and a way to know which of the 40 floors below us are safe to walk on, and which ones are waiting to drown someone. That's not a fight. Nobody's shown up with a knife wanting mine. But sooner or later, someone will. And when that happens, Takeru's read on me engineer, not fighter. Filed under useful later is going to matter a great deal more than either of us understands right now. "There's a supply room on 11, Mia says, tying off the bandage. Or there was. Nobody's checked it since this morning. If half of what people are saying is true, we've got maybe a week of food between 70 people, and that's being generous. A week? 70 people? 40 floors of unknown structural integrity, half of them possibly flooded, and no way down except stairs that might not all still be stairs." Hana looks up from the dog, meets my eyes across the stairwell, not scared exactly. More like she's waiting to see what kind of person I turn out to be. "Can you tell which floors are safe?" she asks. "Like, actually tell? Not guess?" Given time and a good look at the structure, yes, I say. Not by guessing, by reading it. It's the first true thing I've said since I woke up that feels like it might actually matter to someone besides me. Takeru's still watching me the way you watch a tool you haven't decided you need yet. Mia's already moving, checking the next person's injuries. The dog's ears are still up, tracking something none of the rest of us can hear yet, somewhere far below, deep in the swaying concrete bones of the last building on Earth. 70 people. A week of food, at best. 39 floors of drowned unknowns beneath us. I stand up, pipe still in hand, and start counting exits. By midday, the stairwell isn't big enough to hold everyone who keeps arriving, so we move down to the 11th floor, a corridor that used to be lined with apartment doors, half of them still shut, a few kicked open by people checking for anyone left inside. Nobody was. That's its own kind of answer nobody says out loud. I count heads while Mia works. 60-something by the time we settle, and more trickle in over the next hour, drawn the same way I was, voices carrying through shafts and stairwells in a building with nothing else to listen to. By evening, the number stabilizes somewhere around 70. 70, in a tower built to hold over 1,000. The math sits in my chest like a stone. I don't say the number out loud. Somebody else does it for me, quietly, and the silence afterward tells me everyone already knew and just hadn't wanted to hear it confirmed. A man crouches by a dead junction box near the stairwell door, panel already off. Wires spread out on a cloth like he's performing surgery. He doesn't look up when I pass. Elevators are dead, he says, to nobody in particular, or maybe to me, since I'm the one standing closest. Not tripped breaker dead. Actually dead. No power anywhere in this shaft, and I've checked 4 of them. You an electrician? Was? He finally looks up, early 30s, tired eyes, the kind of tired that isn't about one bad night. Daiichi. And before you ask, no. I don't know why the lights on the emergency panels still glow if there's no power source I can find. I don't know why half this building doesn't add up. I've stopped expecting it to. That's twice now I've heard that same specific defeat, not panic, past panic, into something flatter. I understand it. I felt it on the roof, staring at a horizon with no land in it. Water's the bigger problem, Daiichi adds, standing, wiping his hands on his pants. Pipes still have pressure, but it's dropping. Whatever's feeding this building isn't being refilled. Give it 2-3 days, and taps go dry floor by floor. Top down probably, since gravity's still gravity. I rigged a catch system on the roof, I say. During the storm. It worked, filled a decent reserve. Daiichi's eyebrows go up, the first real reaction I've gotten out of him. You rigged it. With what exactly? A tarp, some pavers, and an open drain hatch that somebody built this roof to feed straight into a cistern. Huh. He looks at me a beat longer than the sentence deserves. That's the first useful thing I've heard all day that wasn't stay calm. It's a small thing, being taken seriously by someone who clearly doesn't hand that out for free. I file the feeling away. I don't have time to enjoy it. Takeru has already claimed the stairwell landings as choke points, and by the time I find him, he's assigning 2 people to each one, showing them how to brace a door with a chair leg wedged under the handle. It's not a bad instinct. It's just not the instinct I would have led with. We need eyes on every floor, he tells me when I ask what the plan is. Systematic sweep, top to bottom, 2-person teams, mark what's clear and what isn't. If there's danger in this building, people, animals, whatever I want to know before it finds us, that's going to take days, and half your teams are going to be walking on floors we don't know can hold their weight, I say. Some of the lower levels are flooded. If water's gotten into structural steel down there, corrosion could have already started eating at the load points, and we won't see it from a hallway sweep. We need to understand what's actually holding this building up before we start marching 70 people across every floor of it. Takeru's jaw sets in a way I'm starting to recognize. And how long does your version take? Faster than losing someone through a floor that looks fine and isn't. He doesn't answer that directly. He just says, do it your way on the floors you want. My people are still sweeping. We don't have days to debate this every hour. We don't know what's below us is an hour something could be finding us instead. He's not wrong either. That's the uncomfortable part. 2 right answers pointed in different directions, and nobody in this stairwell has the authority yet to pick one over the other. So we do both, badly, in parallel, and hope the seams don't show. Hana finds me an hour later, the dog pressed against her leg the whole way, limping slightly on the side with the wound. Mia says he needs the antibiotics from the medical kit, Hana says. Not quite a question, like she already expects to be told no. But somebody said we shouldn't waste them on a dog when people might need them. I crouch down. The wound along his flank is inflamed at the edges, not fresh, healing wrong. He watches me with the particular stillness of an animal deciding whether I'm a threat and doesn't growl, which I take as a good sign. That's not my call, I say. That's Mia's. She wants to give them to him. Some of the others don't want her to. I find Mia crouched over her supply bag, small, entirely inadequate for 70 people, a handful of bandages, 1 bottle of antibiotics, antiseptic wipes, painkillers that won't last the week. Daiichi's there too, and a woman I haven't met, arms crossed, clearly the sum of the others Hana meant. It's 1 dose, Mia says, before anyone asks me to weigh in. 1 dose, for an infection that'll kill him in 3 days if it spreads. We are not so poor yet that a single dose decides whether people live or die. Yet, the other woman repeats. That's the word doing all the work in that sentence. He's not just a dog, Hana says, quieter than I expect from her, and everyone looks at her like they forgot a 12-year-old was standing in the argument about her own dog. He knew something was wrong before any of us did. On the roof, before the storm, he wouldn't stop pacing. Nobody argues that point because nobody can disprove it, and because it's the kind of detail that changes the shape of an argument without anyone admitting it did. Mia looks at me, not asking permission exactly, more looking for someone to share the decision with so it doesn't sit entirely on her. If he's actually reading the building better than we are, I say slowly, that's not sentiment. That's an early warning system with legs. I'd rather have that working than not. It's not the whole reason I say yes. Some of it is just Hana's face. But it's true enough to hold up. And that's enough for Mia. She gives the dose. The other woman doesn't argue further, just walks away with her arms still crossed. And I understand that the piece here is thinner than it looks. Held together by scarcity and the fact that nobody's hungry enough yet to turn that scarcity into a weapon. Hana names him that night. Kuro. Black for nothing in particular except that it fits. The corridor collapse almost happens on the 9th floor, 2 hours before sunset. Takaru's sweep team, 3 people, moving fast, checking rooms and marking doors with chalk someone found in a maintenance closet, is working their way down a residential hallway when I catch up to flag something I noticed from the stairwell landing. Above, a crack pattern in the ceiling, running the wrong direction, spiderwebbing from a point that should be structurally dead calm. We already cleared this hall, the woman leading the team tells me, not unkindly. Just busy. Floor's solid. We walked it twice. Walking it tells you it held the last time someone walked it, I say. It doesn't tell you what's happening in the slab right now. I point up, at the crack pattern nobody else has looked at twice. That's not old damage. Old cracks are straight, follow the rebar grid, stay put. That one's branching, and it's fresh, see how the edges are still sharp, no dust settled in the gap. Something up there shifted recently, and whatever's above this hallway is transferring load somewhere it isn't supposed to go. Takeru arrives mid-argument, already skeptical, already moving to wave the team forward. Floor's solid, we walked it, we don't have time for cracks in a ceiling nobody but the engineer cares about. I don't argue with him directly. I just put a hand flat on the corridor wall, 10 feet ahead of where the team is about to walk, and feel it, a vibration too fine to see, a hum that shouldn't be in a floor that's holding. Stop, I say. And something in my voice must land different than the crack pattern did, because they actually stop. 4 seconds later, the floor ahead of them drops 6 inches with a sound like a gunshot, concrete dust exploding up through the gap. And the whole section of hallway they were about to walk into sags into a shallow crater where the slab below finally gave way to whatever's been eating it from underneath: water damage, corrosion. Weeks or months of stress none of us were here to watch happen. Nobody's hurt. That's the only number that matters. But the silence afterward is a different kind than the one from the head count, sharper, more personal, because everyone in that hallway understands exactly how close 4 seconds was. Takeru looks at the collapsed section, then at me, and I watch him do the same recalibration I saw the first time we met, except reversed. Whatever slot he'd filed me under useful later, not useful now, cracks a little too. You saw that from 30 feet away, he says. It's not quite a question. I read it from 30 feet away. There's a difference, and it's the difference that matters. He doesn't apologize, and I don't expect him to. What he does instead is quieter and I think harder for him. He tells his team to hold every sweep until I've walked ahead of them and confirmed the floor. It's not surrender, it's recalculation. Command stays with him, he's still the one giving orders. Still the 170 frightened people look to when something needs deciding fast, but the shape of what useful means in this building just shifted under his feet. Exactly the way that hallway floor did. We find out about the cans an hour after that, in the last useful light of the day. The supply room on the 2nd floor, what's left of a small convenience market that must have served the ground-level shops, was inventoried that morning. Canned goods, dry rice, bottled water, counted and recounted by 2 people Takaru trusts, numbers written on a torn cardboard box because nobody has paper. When Daichi goes back down at dusk to fetch enough for tonight's meal, the numbers don't match. 11 cans gone. Not knocked over, not spilled, not swept away by water. Missing cleanly from a locked room that only a handful of people were supposed to know how to access. Daichi comes back up the stairwell fast, jaw tight, and says the thing that turns 70 exhausted, grateful, frightened people into 70 exhausted, grateful, frightened, and suspicious people, all at once. Somebody in this building already knows exactly what we have, he says, and they've already decided not to share it. Nobody says anything for a long moment. Hana's hand finds Kuro's fur without her seeming to notice she's done it. Mia's eyes go to her medical bag, instinctively, like she's already recalculating what else might disappear. Takeru's face does the thing it does when a threat becomes concrete instead of theoretical, flattens, focuses, starts making a list. I think about the corridor that almost swallowed 3 people 2 hours ago, and I think that whatever's wrong with this building, the structure might turn out to be the easy problem. Nobody sleeps well the night the cans go missing, but morning still arrives the way it always does. indifferent to whatever fear kept people awake, and 70 hungry people still need a plan for the day, whether or not there's a thief among them. I find Daiichi already at the gym on the roof, standing in the doorway, looking at the cracked glass wall and the dead exercise machines with an expression I recognize because I woke up wearing it myself 2 days ago. "This is the only room up here with real light exposure," I say. "Glass on 3 sides, no structure blocking the sun most of the day. If we're going to grow anything before winter finds us, or before the food runs out, whichever comes first, it starts here." "Grow what, exactly?" Daiichi kicks a dead treadmill out of the way. "We don't have seeds. We don't have soil. We have a gym. We have a supply room with rice, and rice sprouts if you know how to trick it into sprouting. We have planters if we tear out enough of these machines and use the frames. We have soil if someone's willing to haul dirt up from wherever the landscaping used to be before this building decided to become a boat." I put a hand on the nearest treadmill, feel the weight of it. "And we have you. If you can rig lighting that doesn't depend on a generator, we can't refuel." That's the sentence that changes his face. Not the plan is obvious once somebody says it out loud. It's being handed a problem that's actually solvable with what's in his hands, instead of another problem that just needs to be survived. "Hand crank," he says, already working it in his head. "Bike generators, if I can strip enough drivetrains out of these machines. Store charge in whatever batteries we've scavenged, run low-draw grow lights off it during the dark hours. It won't be much. It won't need to be much if the glass is doing half the work during the day. That's the idea." He looks at me sideways, something almost like respect crossing his face before he buries it back under his usual flatness. "You're not what I expected when Takeru called you the engineer, like it was a consolation prize." "Give it time," I say. "He might be right yet." We spend the next 2 days building a system instead of just surviving inside one. It's the first time since the roof that the ache in my chest, the low, constant hum of everything is wrong, nothing makes sense. The world ended and nobody told me why goes quiet for hours at a stretch, because there's a problem in front of me that responds to effort. Daiichi strips 3 stationary bikes down to their resistance mechanisms, rigs them to a salvaged inverter, and by the second evening we've got 4 grow lamps glowing dim amber over torn open planter beds made from treadmill frames and tarp liner. Filled with dirt, hauled up 11 flights by anyone with a spare hour and a bucket. Mia contributes rice, a fraction of the community's dwindling reserve, soaked and pre-sprouted on wet cloth before going into the soil. Because whole grain rice from a dead convenience store won't just start growing on its own, and she's the only one who thinks to ask that question before we waste 3 days finding out the hard way. Hana spends an afternoon coaxing Kuro to stop trying to dig up the new beds, which he treats as an open invitation rather than agriculture. The parking garage becomes the other half of the planned 2 underground levels, dry above the waterline that's slowly creeping through the lower structure, close enough to the stairwell to be defensible, far enough from living spaces that nobody has to sleep next to what's left of the food. We move the second-floor supplies down there over one long afternoon. Takeru's people forming a human chain up and down the ramp, counting everything twice this time, writing the numbers where more than 2 people can see them. By the 3rd evening, for the first time since I woke up on that roof, there's something that resembles a working system. Water collection feeding a growing reserve. A supply cache, secured and counted. A dark room full of amber light and green chutes barely an inch tall, powered by 4 bicycles and a man who used to fix broken outlets for a living. It's small, it's fragile, it's also the first thing in this building that gets better instead of worse with each passing day, and that difference matters more to morale than anyone says out loud. The fuel argument happens on the second night over what's left of the generator 1 working unit, salvaged from a maintenance closet, with a tank that's maybe a third full and no way to refill it that anyone's found yet. We use it for the grow lights, I say. Even a few hours a night on top of what Daiichi's rig produces, and we cut the time to first harvest by a third, maybe more. Every day sooner we're not eating into the reserve is a day we don't starve. Or, Takeru says, arms crossed, we keep it exactly where it is, full tank, ready to run a signal light or a flare system if something ever needs the entire building's attention at once. You want to burn our only backup power on lettuce? It's not lettuce, it's the difference between running out of food in 3 weeks or 6. And if something comes through that door tonight, Mardurs, another group, anything, and we need every floor to know it fast, you want us relying on people shouting up a stairwell? Neither of us is wrong, which is becoming a familiar and unpleasant shape to these arguments. I don't have a clever answer that makes the risk disappear. I just have the math. 70 people, a shrinking supply room, and a growing system that only works as fast as we're willing to feed it. Half, I say finally. We ration it. Enough hours on the grow lights to matter, not enough to empty the tank. We keep a reserve for exactly the thing you're describing. Takeru doesn't like halves, I'm starting to understand that about him. that he trusts whole decisions more than compromises, but he doesn't have a better answer either. And eventually he gives the order himself rather than let it look like I overruled him. It's a small thing. It matters to him more than it should, and I'm starting to understand that too. We run the generator 2 hours a night, feeding the grow lamps on top of Daiichi's pedaled charge. The tank drops. The chutes come up a little straighter, a little faster. Nobody knows yet whether we made the right call, because the only way to find out is to wait for the day we need that fuel for something else and discover whether it's still there. The tension about the missing cans doesn't fade, if anything it curdles, the way fear does when it has nothing solid to attach to. Takeru runs patrols twice a day now, walking the secured floors, checking the supply room's new lock, questioning anyone who was near the second floor the day of the theft. He finds nothing. No forced door, no obvious culprit, no second theft to confirm the first. Wasn't some kind of miscount born of panic and exhaustion. That should be reassuring. It isn't. It means whoever took the cans is careful, patient, and still here, watching how we react. I catch fragments of it in the way people look at each other now a half-second longer than they used to, a flicker of calculation before anyone hands off a task or shares a meal. 70 strangers built a fragile kind of trust over 3 days of shared fear, and 11 missing cans are enough to put a hairline crack through all of it. I think about the ceiling on the 9th floor, the crack pattern that looked old until I read it right and found it was fresh. Trust cracks the same way. You don't always see it until something underneath gives way. Hana notices it too, in her own quiet way. She starts keeping Kuro closer, not out of the affection that's obviously growing between them, but something more deliberate, like she's decided, on her own, that he's a kind of alarm the rest of us don't have. He knew about the storm before we did, she tells me one evening, while I'm checking the tension on one of Daichi's bike rigs. And yesterday he wouldn't go near the stairwell on 6, just sat down and wouldn't move, like something was wrong with it. Did you check 6? Takeru's people did. Said it was fine. I file that away without saying so out loud. Takeru's sweeps check for what people can see: broken doors, standing water, obvious danger. Kuro's checking for something else, and I'm increasingly convinced it's worth more than a hallway walkthrough. The same way a hairline crack in a slab is worth more than a boot stamped on solid-looking concrete. It's Hana who calls me down to the 8th floor that night, voice pitched low and urgent in a way that pulls Daichi and Mia out of their own tasks before I even reach the stairwell. Kuro is planted in front of a technical access door, one of the maintenance shafts that thread through the building's core, carrying pipes and conduit between floors. The same kind of shaft I climbed down out of on the first day. The door is closed, locked, as far as anyone can tell, the same as it's been since we mapped this floor 2 days ago. Kuro isn't barking. He's doing something quieter and worse, a low, continuous growl. Ears flat, weight forward on his front legs, eyes fixed on a door that, as far as any of us know, opens onto nothing but pipes and dark. Nobody in the small group gathered behind Hana says anything for a moment. Mia's hand goes still on the strap of her bag. Daichi looks at me the way he started to when something needs reading instead of guessing. I put my palm flat against the door, the same instinct that saved 3 people from a collapsing floor 2 days ago, listening for whatever a dog can hear that I can't. Somewhere on the other side, faint enough that I could almost convince myself I imagined it, something shifts. Whatever's behind that shaft door doesn't come out, and it doesn't make another sound, no matter how long the 5 of us stand there listening to Kuro growl at rusted metal. After 10 minutes with nothing but silence and a dog who won't back down, Takeru makes the call to pull everyone back to the stairwell for the night and post a 2-person watch on the 8th floor landing instead of forcing a door none of us can be sure isn't a trap. It's the right call. It's also a long night, and I spend most of it not sleeping, running the last 2 weeks through my head like a set of blueprints I haven't finished reading. By morning I have a theory, and I don't like how obvious it feels in hindsight. Walk me through the supply room theft again, I say to Daichi over what passes for breakfast: a handful of rice, cooked thin, split between too many people. The morning it happened, who'd been in and out that week. He doesn't ask why. He's learned, the same way I have, that when one of us starts pulling at a thread, it's usually worth letting the thread finish unraveling before asking questions. Inventory team went in twice, morning and evening, same 2 people both times, same numbers both times until the evening they didn't match. Before that, whoever needed rations came by the door, called it out, someone inside handed it over. Standard traffic. Nothing that stood out. And the door. Locked how? Deadbolt manual, key. We cut ourselves out of a spare in the building manager's office. Only 4 keys exist. I know because I cut them. So 11 cans went missing from a room with a lock only 4 people can open, and none of those 4 people is missing 11 cans worth of trust from the rest of the group, because nobody's accused them. I chew through the thought while I chew through the rice. Which means either one of the 4 is lying extremely well, or the room isn't as sealed as we think it is. Daiichi's expression shifts, the flat cynicism giving way to something sharper. There's a service hatch in the back corner. We didn't think much of it. It's 1.5 feet square, feeds into the building's dry goods delivery chute from when this was still a functioning market. Too small for an adult to fit through, we figured. Did you actually check that, or did you figure it and move on? He doesn't answer, which is its own answer. The hatch is exactly where Daiichi describes it. Half hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit nobody bothered to move because the room already looked picked clean around it. I pull the shelving aside myself, and the moment my hand touches the hatch cover, I know we were wrong about it being too small, not because of the hatch itself, but because of what's on it. A thin, consistent film of dust across the surrounding wall, disturbed in a narrow band along the hatch's bottom edge, exactly the width the body makes, dragging itself through a tight space. Over and over, enough times to wear a clean path into 2 weeks of settled grit. Somebody's been using this, I say regularly. Not once. This is a route, not an accident. I trace where the delivery chute runs on the floor plan I've been building in my head since day 2 up through the 2nd floor, angling through a service void behind the walls, connecting to exactly the kind of narrow vertical shaft system Kuro was growling at last night, 3 floors up. It's not a coincidence. It's a person small enough to use a route none of us thought to check, moving between 2 points that only look unconnected if you're reading the building as rooms instead of as a system. He's not stealing randomly, I say. Half to Daiichi, half to myself. Every theft happened within a day of inventory being counted. He's watching us count. He knows exactly how much he can take without the shortfall being obvious enough to trigger a real search until the last time, when he got greedy or careless. Daiichi looks at the dust trail, then at me, and doesn't bother hiding what's on his face this time. Takeru's had 2 people watching every entrance to this room for a week. You found this in an hour looking at dust. Different problem needs a different tool, I say, but it lands the way it started to land every time, not gloating. Just a fact that keeps proving itself whether I want it to or not. Takeru doesn't love being told his patrols missed something a look at a dusty wall caught, but to his credit, he doesn't waste time being proud about it either. Once I lay out the route service hatch, delivery chute, vertical shaft, the same shaft Kuro wouldn't leave alone he's already moving, pulling 2 of his most trusted people to cover the shaft's other access points before whoever's using it can bolt somewhere new. We take the door itself this time, not the hatch. Forcing rusted hinges is loud, but it's faster than trying to squeeze an adult through a 1.5 foot opening, and loud is fine when you've already got the exits covered. The shaft is dark, narrow, smelling of stagnant water and something human sweat, old fabric, the particular staleness of a space someone's been living in far longer than they should have to. A short passage back, wedged into a maintenance alcove behind a bank of dead conduit, we find him. A man, maybe 40, thin in the specific way that isn't natural leanness but weeks of eating less than a body needs. He's got a knife in one hand the second the door bangs open, and for a half second the whole narrow space feels like it could turn into something none of us want. Then he sees how many of us there are, sees Takeru's size filling the doorway, and the knife hand drops before anyone has to force it. I wasn't going to hurt anyone, he says fast, the words falling over each other. I couldn't find anyone. I woke up alone on 19. I heard people moving through the walls for days before I worked up the nerve to look, and by the time I did, there were already sides. Already people watching each other. And I didn't know if I'd be let in or... So you decided stealing was safer than asking, Takeru says. It's not a question, and it's not kind. I decided starving alone in a wall wasn't safer than anything, the man says, and something about the flatness in his voice, the specific exhaustion of it, is uncomfortably familiar. It's the same flatness I heard in Daiichi's voice the first hour I met him, the same one I've caught in my own thoughts more than once since the roof. Fear doesn't always look like a knife in a dark shaft. Sometimes it just looks tired. His name is Osamu. He gives it up without being asked twice, along with the rest of it 2 weeks alone, rationing what he could take without anyone tracking it down to him. Terrified that showing himself meant either violence or exile, and not sure which was worse. The argument about what to do with him happens back on the 11th floor, in front of enough people that it stops being a decision and starts being a referendum. He's been stealing from 70 people who are already rationing themselves to nothing, the woman who argued against Kuro's medicine says, arms crossed the same way they were then. We let him back in. What's the lesson? Steal quietly enough and long enough and eventually you get amnesty. He's one man who's been alone for 2 weeks, Mia says. He's not a threat. He's a symptom of the fact that we never actually told people outside this floor that there was a here to come to. That's not the point, the woman snaps. The point is trust. We just spent 2 weeks wondering if one of our own was lying to our faces. Turns out someone was just not one of the 4 with a key. How do we know there isn't another one of him in the walls right now? Takeru doesn't say anything for a long moment, which from him is its own kind of statement. When he finally speaks, it's not to the crowd, it's to Osamu, direct, unhurried. You said you've been moving through the service voids for 2 weeks. What else have you seen down there that we haven't? Osamu hesitates, reads the room correctly as one where information might be the only currency he has left, and answers. There's a flooded level, 17 down, past where anyone's mapped. I went looking for a way around it once and found a stockroom that never got touched, sealed doors. High enough the water hasn't reached it yet. Cases of bottled water, some canned goods. I couldn't carry much through the route I had, but it's there. The room goes quiet in a different way than before. Takeru looks at me. I do the math out loud because it's the only currency I have to offer back. If that's real, that's the difference between rationing to nothing in a week and having a real buffer going into whatever comes next, I say. We've been running this whole system assuming we know the full inventory of this building. We don't. He does. Or at least he knows more of it than we do. It isn't mercy that turns the room in the end. It's arithmetic. Exile is safer in the short term and poorer in every other sense. Keeping him, watched but fed, costs a small amount of trust and buys a genuine chance at solving the thing every one of us is actually afraid of. Which isn't Osamu, it's the number of days left before the food runs out for good. Takeru makes the final call, the way he's supposed to, and I notice he asks me first, quietly, before announcing it to the room. Small thing. It means the shape of leadership here has already started to bend, even if neither of us has said so out loud yet. Osamu stays. Watched, for now, sleeping near the stairwell landing instead of in a wall, but fed properly for the first time in 2 weeks. And by the next evening he's led 2 of Takeru's people down to the sealed stockroom on 17 exactly as described. Cases of water. Enough cans to add real weeks to the reserve instead of days. The inventory numbers, when Daichi chalks them onto the cardboard sheet that night, look different for the first time since any of us started counting not abundant, never abundant, but predictable. A week of buffer becomes something closer to a month if we're careful. It's the first internal threat this building has produced, and it closes not with punishment but with a system absorbing one more piece and getting stronger for it. I don't know yet if that's a good sign about what kind of place this is becoming, or just the first time it was easy. I'm on the roof that evening, checking the rain catch after 2 dry days when Hana finds me, Kuro trotting ahead of her the way he does now whenever there's ground to cover. Mia says you found Osamu because of dust, she says. That's kind of a boring superpower. Boring superpowers keep people fed, I say. Flashy ones just look good doing it. She almost smiles at that, then stops, squinting out past the railing into the haze that settled thick over the water tonight. Fog instead of storm, low and gray and close to the surface. Is that a bird? She asks, pointing. I follow her finger. Far out, at the exact edge of what the fog allows anyone to see, there's a shape that isn't water and isn't sky tall, angular, breaking the horizon line in a way nothing should out here, where nothing has broken that line since the morning I woke up alone on this roof. It's not moving, it's not close, but it's there, and it's not us. Kuro's ears go up, tracking it the same way they tracked the shaft door last night, and this time he doesn't growl. He just goes very, very still. The shape on the horizon doesn't disappear with the fog. 2 mornings running, clear skies confirm what Hana spotted through the haze, a structure, distant, angular against the flat gray line of the sea. Too far to make out details, but too solid to be a trick of weather. It doesn't move closer. It doesn't move away. It just sits there, a fact that changes everything simply by existing. Because until 3 days ago, every one of us assumed we were the only thing left afloat in the world. We need to know what it is, I say on the 3rd morning, standing at the railing with Takeru while the shape holds steady in better light than we've had since I woke up here. Another arc, most likely a building, drifting the same way we are. Which means people. Which means answers to questions we can't answer alone. Or it means danger, Takeru says. You're assuming people on it means people like us. Could just as easily mean people who see 70 strangers on a plot of driftwood as 70 strangers to take from. Could be either. Won't know from here. He doesn't argue that. He's already decided we're going, the way I already decided the moment I saw the shape hold its position for 2 straight days. What we're actually negotiating, standing at that railing, is who goes and what they carry. The rafts take 4 days to build properly salvaged pallets, sealed drums lashed underneath for buoyancy, a jury-rigged sail from tarp material Daichi swears he can steer with if the wind cooperates. It's not much. It's also the only thing standing between whoever crosses that water and drowning halfway there, so we build it slow and check every lashing twice. 4 of us go. Takeru, because nobody else here can read a threat and respond to it as fast, and because he'd never forgive himself for staying behind while I crossed open water without him. Osamu, 3 weeks fed and steadier than the man we pulled out of a maintenance shaft, asks to come himself, not ordered, asked in a way that makes it clear he understands exactly what he's offering. I know what it's like to be the one nobody trusts yet, he tells me the night before, low enough that only I hear it. If there's a chance to be useful instead of watched, I want it. And Ichiro, one of the building's older residents, a soft-spoken man who ran some kind of import business in the life before and has spent the last 2 weeks quietly organizing ration schedules with a patience nobody younger seems to have, he volunteers on the grounds that any negotiation benefits from someone who's spent a career doing exactly that. I have my doubts about how well careful boardroom diplomacy translates to a floating stranger's territory, but I keep them to myself. We need every kind of skill we can field, and I don't yet have any reason not to trust him. That leaves me, because I'm the one who insists on going, and because if this is a structure like ours, someone needs to read it the way I read our own fast and correctly the first time. The argument about what to carry happens the night before departure, over the last of the good light, in what used to be a hardware store on the ground floor. Tools, I say, looking at the small collection we've gathered: a socket set, a hand drill, coils of wire, a pipe cutter. If they're a working community, tools are worth more to them than food. Food they can grow or scavenge if they've got any structure like ours. A working drill, a full socket set that's not replaceable without exactly the kind of scavenging trip that gets people killed. Or we bring food. The woman who's argued against every decision since the medicine dispute says, arms crossed in the doorway. Something they can eat today, not something they have to already have a use for, and we keep the tools here, where we actually need them. We need the pump fixed on the 11th floor cistern line, Daichi says, quieter than usual, which is how I know it's costing him to say it. That drill's the only one with the right bit for it. I send that drill across the water. Best case, it comes back in a week. Worst case, it doesn't come back at all, and that pump stays broken until we find another one. It's a real cost, not a hypothetical one. The cistern feeds half our fresh water reserve, and without the pump working at full capacity, the tank fills slower, which means less water for the greenhouse, which means slower growth, which means the whole fragile chain we've spent 2 weeks building runs thinner right when we're already stretched. If they've got a working community over there, I say, food is the thing they can least afford to give away and the thing we can least afford to give up. Tools are different. A good tool is worth more traded than eaten, to anyone building something instead of just surviving day to day. If they're just scavenging like we were on day one, food's the better offer. If they've built something, tools buy us more. That's a guess, Takeru says. It's a guess based on the fact that their structures held position for 4 days without drifting into us or away from us, I say. That's not luck. Somebody over there is either controlling their drift or reading the currents well enough to hold station near a resource they've already identified, which is us. That's not survivors, that's a system. Systems want tools. It's thin reasoning. And I know it's thin reasoning even as I say it, but it's the best read I've got. And in the end, it's enough to tip the room. We pack the drill, the socket set, the wire, and half the pipe cutters and leave the food reserve untouched. The pump on 11 stays broken. Daichi doesn't say anything else about it, but I catch him checking the cistern gauge twice that evening, watching the water level the way a man watches a wound he's decided not to complain about. Before all of that, before the argument, before the packing, there's the greenhouse, and I take the long way past it on purpose that afternoon, because I want to see the thing I keep telling myself is worth the risk. 2 weeks ago, it was a cracked gym with dead machines and broken glass. Now there are 6 rows of green pushing up out of torn treadmill frames. Rice shoots a handspan tall. Beans climbing a trellis Daichi welded out of scrap conduit. And the amber grow lamps humming low and steady on their rationed 2 hours of borrowed generator fuel. It's not a farm. It's barely a garden. But 2 weeks ago, the supply room held 11 fewer cans than it should have, and every face in this building carried the particular tightness of people doing math they didn't want to finish. Now there's a room that gets better every single day on its own, without anyone having to sacrifice anything new to keep it that way. Was empty shelves and a locked door nobody trusted. Is 6 rows of green and a system that works. I stand there a minute longer than I need to, because in 3 days, I'm getting on a raft made of pallets and sealed drums to cross open water toward a shape that might be salvation, or might be exactly the kind of danger Takeru's worried about. And I want to remember clearly that the thing waiting behind me is real and worth coming back for. The night before we leave, Mia puts together something that's almost a real dinner rice from the first small harvest, stretched with what's left of the canned goods Osamu led us to. Enough for everyone to get a proper portion instead of the thin, rationed version we've eaten every night since the roof. Nobody calls it a celebration. It functions like one anyway. Hana tells a story about Kuro that isn't true, and that everybody, including her, seems to understand isn't true. which is somehow what makes it work. Kuro as a secret agent from before the flood, sent to watch over the building, disguised as a stray so nobody would suspect him, revealing his true mission only to people he judged worthy. Kuro, for his part, sleeps through the entire story with his head on her leg, twitching occasionally in a dream that has nothing to do with secret missions. And the mismatch between the myth and the actual dog is funnier than the story itself. Mia sits next to me a while after the others start drifting off towards sleep, both of us quiet, watching the last of the grow lamps glow amber through the propped open gym door down the hall. "What was your life like?" she asks, not quite looking at me, before all this. "Not the job? The actual life?" "Small," I say, after thinking about it honestly instead of reaching for something better sounding. "Work, mostly. I was good at reading buildings and not especially good at much else. I don't think I'd have called it a good life if you'd asked me a month ago. I think I'd have called it a life I was planning to fix eventually." "Eventually?" she repeats like she recognizes the word from somewhere close to home. "You?" "I liked my life," she says simply. "I was good at my job, I had people I loved, and none of them are here." She says it without breaking, the way someone says a fact they've already spent their private hours grieving and have decided not to grieve again out loud tonight. I think that's why the garden matters to me as much as it does. It's not just food, it's something that gets to keep existing, when almost everything else didn't get the choice. Neither of us says anything else for a while. It isn't an uncomfortable silence. It's the first one since I woke up on that roof that doesn't have fear folded into it somewhere, and I let myself sit inside it for as long as it lasts. Because tomorrow there's open water, and a shape on the horizon that might not offer silences like this one at all. We push off before full light, the fog still low over the water, 4 of us and a raft that groans under its own weight the same way the tower groans under the swell. Takeru checks the lashings one last time. Osamu adjusts the sail rigging Daichi taught him in a single rushed lesson the night before. Ichiro sits near the stern with the small crate of tools wrapped in oilcloth against the damp quiet, watching the tower shrink behind us with an expression I can't quite read. Hana and Mia stand at the railing above, Kuro between them, and Hana doesn't wave so much as hold one hand very still in the air, like she's afraid moving it will jinx something. The fog closes around us within 20 minutes, swallowing the tower first, then the last visible edge of anything solid, until there's nothing left but gray water, gray sky, and a raft carrying 4 people and a box of tools toward a shape none of us has seen clearly even once. The fog burns off 2 hours in, and the shape that's been a rumor on our horizon for 4 days finally resolves into something real. A squat, wide tower, glass-walled on its lower floors. Steel-ribbed above, unmistakably a former office building, riding low and steady in the water like it's found a balance ours still hasn't. Where our tower flexes and groans with the swell, this one sits almost still, and the difference nags at me before we're even close enough to see faces on its edges. "They've weighted it," I say, half to myself, half to Takeru beside me on the raft. "Ballasted somehow, lower floors probably flooded on purpose instead of by accident. That's not survival instinct. Somebody there understands buoyancy." "Good," Takeru says, eyes already scanning the structure for anything that looks like a weapon instead of an engineering choice. "Means they're organized. Organized is better than desperate most days. We're close enough within the hour to see people a dozen or more, gathered on a lower platform that's been built out from the original building line. Some kind of jury-rigged dock extending over the flooded ground floor. Nobody waves. A few hold what might be tools and might be improvised weapons, and from this distance the difference doesn't matter, because the posture reads the same either way. Watching, not welcoming. Osamu, at the sail rigging, goes quiet in a way I recognize now as his version of nervous. Ichiro straightens where he sits, and I catch him running a hand once over his shirt, smoothing it, like appearances are about to start mattering in a way they haven't since the world ended. They don't let us dock right away. A woman near the front of the platform, mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, a length of rebar in one hand held less like a weapon and more like a habit. She hasn't broken since the day she first needed it. Calls out before we're even close enough to tie off. "That's far enough. State your business before you tie to anything of ours." "We're from a tower 2 days south," Takeru calls back, hands visible, voice pitched to carry without sounding like a threat. 70 people, roughly. "We saw your structure on the horizon and came to talk, not take." Everyone says that right up until they don't mean it anymore. She doesn't lower the rebar. Behind her, the dozen or so others hold their positions, wary but not advancing. We've had 3 groups come through here in the last month saying exactly that. 2 of them meant it. The third one didn't, and we buried 2 people because of it. That lands the way it's meant to. Nobody on our raft says anything for a second. "We brought tools," I say finally, nodding at the oilcloth-wrapped crate Ichiro's holding. Not as a bribe. As an offer. We're not asking to come ashore for free, we're asking to trade, and we'll take no for an answer if that's what it comes to. The woman's eyes move over our raft for people. A modest crate, no visible weapons beyond what any sane person carries crossing open water, and something in her calculation shifts, marginally, though the rebar doesn't move. Tie off at the end platform. 2 of you can come up, the other 2 stay with the raft. Her eyes land on Takeru's size, then mine, and something in the way she reads us amuses her slightly, though nothing about her expression softens. I'm guessing the big one's not the one doing the talking. Her name is Reyes, she doesn't offer a first name, and nobody on the hive seems to use one for her, just the surname like a title. She leads Takeru and me up through the flooded ground floor on a system of ramps and gangways clearly built over weeks, not days. Threading between support columns that vanish down into standing water thick with algae and rust. It's while we're crossing one of those gangways that I see it a hairline crack running diagonal across a support column, wide enough to catch shadow. The kind of crack that doesn't happen from a single stress event, but from sustained load somewhere it was never meant to carry. I stop walking. Reyes notices immediately, hand tightening on the rebar again. Something wrong? That column, I say, nodding at it? How long's it been cracked like that? Her jaw sets. Since before we started using this level? It's fine. We've had engineers look at it, she stops herself, catching the word a half-second too late. You don't have engineers, I say, not unkindly, just reading the room the way I read the crack. Somebody looked at it once and told you it was probably fine because nobody wanted to say otherwise and start a panic. That column isn't cracked from the flood damage everyone assumes it is. It's cracked because whatever you've ballasted the lower floors with is putting torsional load on a column that was only ever designed to carry vertical weight. And every time your structure rolls with the swell, that crack opens a fraction more than it closes. Reyes doesn't answer right away. Her eyes go to the crack, then back to me, and I watch the same recalibration cross her face that I've seen cross Daiichi's, Takeru's, half a dozen faces in my own building over the last 2 weeks, the specific, involuntary shift of someone realizing the stranger in front of them isn't guessing. And if it goes? She asks, quieter now. Depends how far along it already is. Worst case, this whole gangway system loses its main support during a hard roll and takes people with it into water that's been standing here long enough to hide whatever's underneath it. Best case, it holds another year and you never find out how close it came. I crouch, run a hand along the crack's lower edge, feeling for the give I already suspect is there. I can't fix it from here today with what I've got in that crate. But I can tell you how to redistribute the load off it using the columns on either side, and buy yourselves real time instead of luck. Reyes is quiet for a long moment, looking at the crack like she's seeing it for the first time despite having walked past it daily for however long the hive has stood. When she finally speaks, the wariness hasn't left her voice, but something's been added to it that wasn't there on the dock. Come talk to Merrick. He runs things here, such as running things means anything anymore. A pause. And bring your tools. Might be we've got more to trade than I was planning to offer an hour ago. Marek turns out to be younger than I expect, 30 at most. Sharp-eyed, missing 2 fingers on his left hand in a way nobody explains and I don't ask about. He listens to Reyes' report on the column, then to my proposal load redistribution using salvaged steel bracing, a design I sketch rough on the back of a torn inventory sheet, while he watches with the particular intensity of a man who spent weeks worrying about a problem he didn't have the vocabulary to describe. You're saying this with a straight face, he says when I finish, like you didn't just solve something we've been quietly panicking about for a month. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I'd rather you trust the offer than the messenger, I say. Tools for the bracing work, plus whatever surplus you're willing to part with. That's the trade. The column advice comes free because a partner who might drown when their support structure fails isn't much of a partner. Marek studies me a long moment, then laughs short, surprised, genuine. Reyes said you'd talk like an engineer instead of a trader. She wasn't wrong. He extends his good hand. Deal. And for what it's worth, whoever you people are, word's going to get around this floor by tonight that the tower to the south sent an engineer who reads buildings the way the rest of us read faces. I catch it already starting before we've even finished the negotiation, 2 workers near the doorway, murmuring, one of them glancing my way and saying something to the other that includes the word engineer, and a gesture toward the cracked column. Like the story's already left the room ahead of me and started walking the halls on its own. It's over the second round of negotiation dividing out actual quantities. Tools against a modest surplus of preserved fish and freshwater filtration parts the hive has, and we don't, that the real shape of the danger comes out, almost sideways, the way important things sometimes do in the middle of ordinary conversation. We'd trade more if we had more to spare, Merrick says, not quite apologizing. Tribute season's close. Whatever we don't hand over to the Leviathan's people gets taken anyway, just less politely. Takeru's posture changes immediately, the way it does whenever a word lands that sounds like a threat instead of a description. Tribute. To who? Marek and Reyes exchange a look that says, this is a conversation they've had many times among themselves and never enjoyed having with outsiders. There's a bigger arc than any of us, out past the current line, Reyes says finally. Used to be some kind of cruise resort tower, from what people who've seen it say. Runs itself like a kingdom now. They call the man in charge the Tide King. You pay what he asks, food, water, materials, whatever he decides your arc can spare that month, or his people come take it themselves, and they don't ask nicely the second time. And if you fight back, I ask? Then you meet Harpoon, Merrick says. And something in the way he says the name flat, careful, like a word that's earned its own weight tells me this isn't a rumor being repeated secondhand. He runs the raiding parties personally, efficient, doesn't waste effort convincing anyone twice. The room goes quieter after that, the kind of quiet that settles over people who've decided a subject is closed, not because it's resolved, but because talking about it doesn't change the outcome. I think about the 70 people 2 days south of here, the greenhouse, the fragile working system we've built out of pallets and grow lamps and hard-won trust, and I understand. In the specific way you understand a structural flaw the moment you finally see it clearly, that whatever the hive has been living under, it isn't a problem that stays contained to the hive. We're still finishing the tool count, crate laid open on a table between us, when a shout goes up from somewhere near the outer platform, sharp, urgent, cutting through the low murmur of the trading floor like a struck bell. Merrick's head comes up first. Reyes is moving before he finishes standing, rebar back in hand out of pure habit. Rafts! Someone calls from the doorway, breathless, pointing back the way we came, out past the flooded ground floor toward open water. Multiple. Coming in fast, from the northeast current line. Takeru's already on his feet, hand instinctively going toward the doorway, toward Osamu and Ichiro and our own raft still tied at the end platform with nobody but 2 people and a crate of trade goods to defend it. Marek's face has gone the particular gray of a man who's had this exact conversation before and knows exactly how it ends if he's slow. That's not tribute season, he says quietly. That's early. The rafts hit the hive's outer platform before anyone can finish deciding what to do about them. I count 6 as they close the distance low, fast, built for speed instead of cargo. Each one carrying 4 or 5 men who move like they've done this exact thing enough times that fear isn't part of the process anymore. Marek's people scatter to positions I realize now were already half prepared, chosen in advance, the muscle memory of a community that's survived this before and expects to survive it again. That doesn't make the sound of the first raft slamming into the platform any less violent, wood splintering, someone screaming a warning that's already too late to matter. Osamu, Ichiro, get to our raft, Takeru snaps, already moving toward the doorway, and I'm a half step behind him before I've consciously decided to follow. Ren, with me. We come out onto the platform into chaos that doesn't look anything like the tidy, purposeful violence I'd braced for. It looks like people hive residents, most of them not fighters, grabbing whatever's nearby and trying to hold a line that keeps buckling because the men coming off those rafts aren't hesitating the way defenders are. One of them goes down near the edge, and I don't let myself look long enough to know if he gets back up. Reyes is somewhere in the middle of it, rebar swinging with the economy of someone who's used it for this exact purpose before, and even she's losing ground. They're pushing for the trade floor, Takeru shouts, reading the shape of the attack faster than I can. That's where the stores are. If they take the platform, they don't need to take the building. I don't have a weapon that matters here a length of scrap pipe. Useless against men with real blades and worse, but I have eyes, and I use them the only way I know how. Reading the platform the way I read a structure. The gangway system, the same one with the cracked column. The one I diagnosed an hour ago as carrying torsional stress it was never built for. The column, I say, grabbing Takeru's arm. The one I flagged. If we can bring down that section of gangway, it isolates their forward group from the rafts behind them, buys the hive room to regroup. Can you do it fast enough to matter? I don't know. I know where to hit it. We don't get the chance to test it cleanly because the fight doesn't wait for a plan to finish forming. A group of 4 raiders breaks from the main press and comes straight for the doorway where Osamu and Ichiro are still working to free our raft's lines. And for one terrible second I understand that everything I've built in my head about the plan is about to become irrelevant next to the much simpler fact of people in danger right in front of me. Takeru moves first, meeting the lead raider with a brutal economy that tells me everything about what security meant in his old life. And for a few seconds it's almost working. He's bigger. He's better trained, and the narrow gangway means they can't surround him. But 4 against 1 is 4 against 1 no matter how good the one is, and I see the gap opening on his flank before he does. I don't think. I throw myself at the column instead, the cracked one, exactly where I told Merrick to redistribute the load, except now I'm doing the opposite. Driving the pipe into the widest part of the fracture with everything I have, twisting using the leverage the crack itself gives me. It's not strength that does it. It's knowing exactly where a structure wants to fail and helping it get there. The gangway section groans, drops 6 inches with a shriek of tearing metal, and buckles hard enough to throw 2 of the 4 raiders into the flooded ground floor below, their momentum gone, their footing gone with it. It buys Takeru the half-second he needs to turn the fight from 4-on-1 into something survivable. It also buys the wrong kind of attention. He comes through the smoke and confusion like he's been waiting for an excuse, tall, lean, moving with an unhurried confidence that's somehow worse than the frantic energy of everyone else on that platform, because it means he's never once been afraid of how this goes. There's a weapon in his hand I don't have a name for, something improvised from a boat hook and cable that looks less like a tool and more like a promise. Somebody's been busy, he says, conversational, almost pleasant, looking at the collapsed gangway section like he's appreciating craftsmanship instead of surveying damage. That's a new one. Didn't know the Hive had an engineer. They don't, Takeru says, putting himself between the man and me without seeming to think about it. We do. The man's eyes shift to me, and something in them recalibrates, filing me away the same unsettling way Takeru did on the first day. Except this filing feels like it comes with a price attached. Then you're the one my boss is going to want to hear about. He doesn't seem to feel any need to raise his voice or his weapon yet. Harpoon, he adds, almost as an afterthought, like a man introducing himself at a party instead of on a battlefield. You'll want to remember that if you're planning on surviving today. Osamu appears at the edge of my vision then, shouting something I don't fully process, and I understand a half-second too late that he's not calling out a warning, he's throwing himself bodily at the gap. Harpoon is about to step through toward Takeru and me, the same gap in the collapsed gangway that our escape route runs through. It happens fast enough that I only understand the shape of it afterward, piecing together fragments in the wrong order. Osamu gets between Harpoon and the doorway. Harpoon doesn't hesitate, doesn't slow, treats the interruption as exactly the inconvenience it is to him and nothing more. The boat hook weapon moves once, economically, the way a man swats something out of his path rather than fights it, and Osamu goes down at the threshold of the doorway he's been holding open for us. Go! Takeru roars, already hauling me backward through the gap, and I don't have time to argue. Don't have time to do anything except let momentum carry me toward the raft where Ichiro is already fumbling the lines free with hands that are shaking too hard to be useful. I look back once. Osamu is still moving, barely, one hand pressed to a wound that's already soaking through his shirt, and the last thing I see before Takeru drags me fully through the doorway is Merrick's people finally closing the gap Osamu bought them, forcing Harpoon's group back from the doorway just long enough. By the time Takeru and I make it to the raft, cutting the last line and shoving off from a platform that's dissolved into a running, screaming melee behind us, Osamu isn't with us. He never makes it back to the raft at all. We don't talk on the water. There isn't anything to say that doesn't sound smaller than what just happened. Ichiro works the sail with hands that won't quite stop shaking, and Takeru sits with his back to the hive, watching the water instead of the horizon. Jaw locked so tight I can see the muscle working from 3 feet away. I keep replaying it. Not the fighting. The fighting is already a blur, adrenaline scrambling the order of things the way it does. What I keep replaying is the 2 weeks before it. A man pulled, shaking out of a maintenance shaft. A knife dropped the second he understood he wasn't going to have to use it. I decided starving alone in a wall wasn't safer than anything. A man who asked to come on this crossing not because anyone ordered him to, but because he wanted, for once, to be the one trusted instead of the one watched. He got exactly what he asked for. It killed him. He didn't have to do that, I say, finally, to no one in particular, somewhere in the second hour of silence. No, Takeru agrees. He did it anyway. He's quiet a while longer before he adds, that's not nothing. Whatever else he was, that's not nothing. I think about the plan I built on instinct back on that gangway, the column, the leverage, using a structure's own weakness against the men attacking it and how it worked exactly as well as it could have, and how none of it mattered enough in the end. Because knowing where a building wants to fail doesn't do anything to stop a man like Harpoon from choosing exactly where he wants to strike. For 2 weeks I've measured myself against Takeru's kind of usefulness and found a different kind that seemed to matter just as much. Today both kinds stood in the same doorway, and a man neither of us could protect died anyway. Takeru and I don't speak again about the fight itself, not directly, But something changes in the way we sit together on that raft, no argument left in either of us about whose approach is right. Just the shared, wordless understanding of two people who moved as one thing today when it counted, however briefly, however late. It isn't friendship yet. It's the first honest seam of something that could become it. The tower comes back into view at dusk, and for the first time since I woke up on that roof, seeing it doesn't bring relief. It brings dread, the specific, heavy dread of a man who has to walk through a door and tell people that someone they knew isn't coming back through it with him. Mia knows before I say a word. She reads it off our faces the way I read a crack in concrete, instantly, completely. And her hand goes to her mouth for just a second before she steadies herself back into the person 70 frightened people need her to be. Hana doesn't ask where Osamu is. She just looks at the three of us standing on the platform instead of four, and something in her face closes over, the particular grief of a child who's already learned, in 2 short weeks, exactly what an empty space in a group means. I tell it plainly because Osamu deserves plain more than he deserves softened. What he did at that doorway. What it cost. The room absorbs it the way the tower absorbs a storm, swaying, groaning, but holding, because it has to. It's Daiichi who finds me an hour later near the stairwell, where I've been sitting with my back against cold concrete, not doing anything useful for the first time since I woke up here. Radio caught something, he says. Quiet. Careful in a way that tells me he already knows this isn't good news arriving on top of worse news. About 20 minutes ago. Not a garbled signal this time. Clear. Somebody calling themselves the Tide King, broadcasting to every frequency and range. Saying what? Daiichi hesitates, and for the first time since I've known him, he looks like a man choosing his words instead of just saying whatever's flattest and truest. Saying he's aware of a tower that traded tools with the Hive today? Saying every ark in his waters owes him tribute, and that ignorance of the custom isn't an excuse he extends twice. He looks at me, and whatever's left of the cynical distance he usually wears is gone entirely. He named us Ren. By location. He knows exactly where we are. Somewhere down the corridor, faint but audible even from here, Kuro starts to growl. The second message comes at dawn, this time not caught by accident but sent direct, deliberate. On a frequency Daiichi swears we never broadcast on ourselves, which means whoever's on the other end already had it before we ever knew to worry about who was listening. A voice, calm in the specific way that unsettles more than shouting would, reads out terms like a man reciting a price list he's recited 100 times before. Tribute due within the week. Food stores, freshwater reserves, any tools of value. In exchange, the tower is left alone, its people unmolested, its business its own. Refuse. And the voice doesn't bother threatening directly, it simply notes, almost as an aside, that the Hive learned yesterday what refusal costs, and that the lesson doesn't usually need repeating twice for anyone paying attention. He signs off calling himself the Tide King, and something about the calm, proprietary confidence in the name makes my skin crawl worse than Harpoon's pleasant, unhurried menace did on that gangway. The meeting that follows fills the 11th floor to capacity, every adult who can stand crammed into the corridor and the rooms opening off it. Because a decision this size can't be made by 4 people in a stairwell anymore, not after Osamu, not after a voice on the radio named us by location. We pay, Ichiro says. First to speak, standing near the front with the same quiet, reasonable authority he carried into every ration schedule negotiation over the last 3 weeks. We pay what he asks, we buy ourselves time, and we use that time to figure out something smarter than a fight we cannot win against people who just proved at the Hive exactly how far they're willing to go. A murmur of agreement moves through part of the crowd, not everyone, but enough that I understand immediately this isn't going to be a short conversation. We pay once, Takeru says, cutting through the murmur before it can build into consensus, and we've told him exactly what we are, not a threat. A source. Sources get milked, not respected. You don't buy safety from a man like that. You buy yourself onto his list of reliable income, and next month's demand is bigger than this month's. And if we refuse, Ichiro says, we get exactly what the Hive got. Rafts, weapons, people we love dying on our own floors instead of someone else's platform. If we refuse and we're ready, I say, stepping into the argument for the first time, it's a different equation than what the Hive faced. They didn't know an attack was coming until it was already on their platform. We do. That's the entire difference between a raid that succeeds and one that doesn't. Ready how? Someone calls from the back, and it's a fair question, the kind that deserves a real answer instead of confidence. I've been turning this over since the radio message first came through at dawn, walking the building in my head the way I walked it that first morning on the roof, looking at every choke point, every stairwell, every place the structure itself could be turned from shelter into weapon. This building wasn't built to be a fortress, I say, but it wasn't built to be easy to attack either. Single stairwells at controlled points, flooded lower levels that already slow down anyone approaching from the water. Technical floors we can seal or open on our own terms. We don't need to match them weapon for weapon. We need to make every approach into this building cost them more than they're willing to pay for 70 people's worth of tribute. I look around the room, at faces that are frightened and exhausted, and for the first time in 3 weeks actually listening to a plan instead of just reacting to fear. The hive lost because they were surprised on open ground they'd already built to be easy to cross. We have walls. We have choke points. We have time, if we use it instead of spending it arguing. The room doesn't split cleanly, and it doesn't resolve in one meeting. It resolves in pieces over the rest of that day and into the next, as smaller conversations do what the big argument couldn't, people testing the idea against their own fear, against what they saw or heard about the hive, against how much they trust the man now proposing to spend the community's dwindling reserves on walls instead of peace. The dilemma at the center of it doesn't get easier no matter how many times it's discussed. Defense costs real, immediate resources, materials repurposed from the greenhouse's carefully rationed scrap. Food reserves diverted from the counter where Daiichi chalks our buffer down to something thinner than it's been since Osamu led us to the 17th floor stockroom. Labor and hours that could otherwise go toward the systems keeping 70 people fed and watered. Tribute costs differently. It costs autonomy, sets a price on our continued existence that we don't control and have no reason to believe will stay fixed. And it costs whatever the Tide King decides tribute means the second time he asks, after he's already learned we'll pay. We're already thin, Daiichi says to me privately, checking the chalk numbers on the cardboard sheet that evening, voice low enough not to carry. If we sink real material into hardening choke points, that steel and wire that isn't going toward fixing that cistern pump, isn't going toward expanding the growing beds before the next harvest. We survive an attack and starve slower instead. That's the trade you're actually asking people to make, even if nobody's saying it out loud in the meetings. I know, I say, because pretending otherwise to him, of all people, would be its own kind of lie. I don't think we survive giving in, either. Not really. Not past the second or third demand. This is the version of thin that has an endpoint we control. He doesn't argue further. He just goes back to the numbers, and I understand that agreeing with someone and liking the cost of agreeing with them are two entirely separate things. And he's decided to live with the gap between them the same way the rest of us are learning to. The vote informal, imperfect, closer to a show of hands and raised voices than any real democratic process, because nobody here has the luxury of formal process anymore, comes down 2 days later, in the same corridor with the same faces, tired in a new and specific way. Takeru speaks last, before the count, and it's the shortest thing he says the entire meeting. I spent my old life being paid to stand between people and danger. I know what it looks like when someone decides you're worth less than the trouble of protecting yourself. Paying this man doesn't buy safety. It buys the appearance of safety, right up until it doesn't. He looks at Ichiro when he says it, not unkindly, but directly. I'd rather spend what we have making that appearance true instead of pretending it already is. The room sides with defense, not overwhelmingly, but enough. Enough that Ichiro, watching the raised hands settle into a clear if not total majority, doesn't argue the outcome, but doesn't hide what's on his face, either the particular, controlled disappointment of a man who believes, sincerely, that the room has just chosen the more dangerous path and simply doesn't have the votes to stop it. For what it's worth, he says to me afterward, quiet, catching me alone near the stairwell as the crowd disperses, I hope you're right. I mean that. I don't say it to be difficult. I say it because if you're wrong, it isn't you who pays first. It's people like Hana. He doesn't wait for an answer, just turns and walks off toward the lower floors, and I stand there a long moment afterward, because the sentence lands exactly where he meant it to. I don't have a clean answer for him. I only have the math, the same math I've trusted since the roof, that a building read correctly and used well beats a promise made to a man who's already shown, by the Hive's account and his own broadcast, exactly how much a promise from him is worth. It's Daiichi who finds me hours later, well after most of the tower has settled into whatever passes for sleep these days, hunched over a spread of salvaged radio components in the maintenance closet that's become his second home. He doesn't call out. He just waves me over, urgent and silent, headphones half off one ear. I was trying to get a cleaner read on the Tide King's broadcast frequency, he says, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. See if I could triangulate range, get a sense how close his people actually are versus how close he wants us to think they are. He taps the dial, fine-tuning something with the delicate patience of a man diffusing something rather than fixing a radio. Found this instead. He plays it low just for the two of us. It's not the Tide King's voice. It's shorter, quieter, encoded in a way that makes most of it an unintelligible burst of static and rhythm, rather than words, except for a handful of seconds near the end where the encoding slips, or wasn't as careful as whoever sent it thought, and a fragment comes through almost clean. It's not coming from outside the tower, it's coming from somewhere inside it, and it's going out. Daichi looks at me in the dim light of the closet, and for the first time since the 11 cans went missing 3 weeks ago, I see real fear on his face instead of his usual flat cynicism. "Ren," he says quietly, "we voted to defend this building 2 days ago, and somebody in here is already talking to the people we voted to defend it against. We don't sleep. There isn't time, and even if there were, neither Daichi nor I could have managed it with a traitor's voice sitting fresh in our ears. Cut off mid-transmission, unidentified. Triangulating a signal inside a 40-story building isn't like doing it across open water," Daichi says, already elbow-deep in a second radio rig he's cannibalizing for parts. Voice tight with the specific frustration of a man who knows exactly how to solve a problem and hates how long it's going to take. Concrete and rebar bounce everything. I need at least 2 more listening points, spread out, to pin down a floor, and even then it's a guess within 4 or 5 levels. Then we get you 2 more listening points, I say. How long? If I don't sleep, and Takeru doesn't ask me why I need to string wire through half the technical shafts in this building at 3 in the morning, maybe 6 hours. We don't have 6 hours to spare, and we spend them anyway, because there's no version of this problem that gets solved faster by rushing it. And I've learned enough about this building by now to know that guessing wrong about where a signal's coming from wastes more time than doing it right the first time. By the time gray light starts finding its way through the stairwell windows, Daichi has 3 data points instead of 1. And the guess has narrowed from 4 or 5 floors to 2, the 9th and the 10th. Both close enough to the technical shaft system that either could plausibly be feeding a hidden transmitter's antenna line up toward open air near the roof. I already have a theory about which one, and I hate how obvious it feels once I let myself follow it all the way through. "Who's had unsupervised access to both floors over the last week?" I asked Daichi, though I already know the answer before he says it, because I've been the one keeping the schedule since the vote 3 days ago. "Ration inventory rounds," Daichi says slowly, working through it out loud the way I've started doing myself. A habit we've picked up from each other without either of us noticing. Ichiro's been running those personally since the vote, said it was the least he could do, given he lost the argument, make sure the defense effort at least gets fed properly while it happens. Neither of us says the rest of it out loud right away, because saying it turns a bad guess into an accusation. And an accusation against a man half the tower still respects isn't something either of us wants to be wrong about. We find him on the 10th floor an hour later, in a maintenance alcove not far from where I first met Kuro growling at a locked shaft door weeks ago. Kneeling beside a compact transmitter rig wired into the building's old emergency antenna line. Small, careful, clearly built or scavenged with real skill, clearly not something assembled in a panic or on a whim. Ichiro doesn't reach for a weapon when he sees us. He doesn't even look particularly surprised, which somehow makes it worse. He just sits back on his heels, hands visible, and looks at me with the same tired, reasonable expression he's worn through every meeting since the vote. Like he's about to explain a ration schedule instead of a betrayal. "How much?" I ask, and my voice comes out flatter than I expect it to. "Everything," he says simply. "Greenhouse location, supply floor, the choke point work you've had people building for 3 days. I told them all of it 2 nights ago, in exchange for a guarantee myself and my family, if any of them turn up, left untouched when the Tide King's people come." He doesn't flinch saying it. "You'll think that's cowardice. I think it's the only version of this that ends with someone from this building still breathing who isn't a fighter, isn't an engineer, isn't useful in the ways this tower has decided matter now." "You had a vote," Takeru says, arriving behind us fast enough that I realize Daichi must have signaled him the moment we confirmed the floor. His voice is low, controlled in a way that's worse than shouting. "You lost it. That's not the same as being handed a death sentence. I watched the Hive lose people over exactly this fight 3 weeks ago," Ichiro says, and for the first time something like real emotion cracks through the reasonable calm. "I am 61 years old. I am not a soldier. I was never going to be useful in the version of this tower you two are building, and I decided I would rather survive as something small than die defending a plan I never believed would work." Nobody has a clean answer for that, not right away, and the silence that follows is its own kind of confirmation that the fear underneath his choice is real, even if the choice itself is unforgivable. "How long ago?" I ask, because it's the only question that still matters. 2 nights ago," he says again, and I watch the last of my hope that this could somehow be contained collapse along with the number. 2 nights is enough time for a fleet to already be moving. 2 nights is enough time for every hour we've spent since building choke points in secret to have been spent building them in plain view of people who already knew exactly where to look. There's no version of confronting Ichiro that undoes the information already sitting in the Tide King's hands. Takeru wants him locked down immediately, under guard, and does exactly that without waiting for another vote. Because some decisions during a crisis don't get the luxury of a full community meeting first. I don't argue. I don't have the energy to argue, and some distant cold part of me recognizes that Takeru's instinct, decisive, immediate, unapologetic, is exactly the right shape for this particular moment. The same way my instinct was the right shape for reading a crack in a slab. Different tools, different moments. I'm starting to understand that leadership here was never going to be one person's job alone. Face slap number 4 lands quietly, without anyone announcing it as such. Takeru spent 3 days walking this building's perimeter, checking every floor personally, trusting his eyes and his instincts the way he's trusted them. His whole working life and the actual threat was never on the perimeter. It was inside, transmitting through a wire he walked past a dozen times without ever suspecting what it was. It's Daiichi's patient signal analysis, and my read of who had unsupervised access and when, that finds what a week of physical patrols couldn't. Takeru doesn't say anything about it directly. He doesn't need to. I catch him afterward, staring at the confiscated transmitter like it's a wound he's trying to understand the shape of. And something in his expression has settled into a kind of respect that doesn't need to be spoken to be real. The tower doesn't panic exactly, but it does something close to it, the specific controlled urgency of 70 people who understand, all at once, that the time they thought they had has already been spent by someone else's decision. Choke point work that was proceeding carefully now happens fast, sloppy in places we don't have time to fix properly. Because sloppy and finished beats careful and half-built if the fleet is already closer than we hoped. In the middle of it, Mia finds me on a landing between floors, both of us catching a breath neither of us has time for. "You look like you haven't slept in 2 days," she says, which is generous since it's been closer to 3. Feels about right. She leans against the wall beside me, quiet for a moment, watching people move crates and scrap steel past us in both directions. "I keep thinking about what I told you before you left for the hive," she says. "About the garden, about something getting to keep existing when everything else didn't get the choice." A pause. I think I meant this place too by then. And I don't think I let myself say it out loud until right now, with a fleet coming and everything I've decided matters about to be tested. "It's not decided yet," I say. "Whatever happens next, it's not already decided." "I know," she says. "I just wanted to say it to someone before we find out." She looks at me, steady, and there's nothing dramatic in it. Just an honest exchange between 2 exhausted people who've built something neither of them expected to build. This is home now. Whatever's left of it after this, however small. I wanted that said out loud once, by me, before anything else happens. I don't have a better answer than agreeing with her, quietly. And for a moment the corridor's chaos recedes just enough that the 2 of us stand in something that isn't quite peace, but is close enough to matter. Hana finds me not long after, Kuro pressed against her leg the way he always is now, and she doesn't bother easing into what she wants to say. "You're going to go fight when they get here," she says. Not a question. "Probably." "Yes." "Don't." It comes out fast, more raw than she probably means it to. "You're the one who figures things out. Takeru's the one who fights. If something happens to you, who figures the next thing out? Who tells us which floor is going to fall before it falls?" I crouch down to her level, the way I did the first time I checked on Kuro's wound, and I don't have a reassurance I actually believe in enough to offer her, so I don't try to manufacture one. "I'm not going to promise you I won't be scared, or that nothing's going to go wrong," I say instead. I've broken enough promises like that already just by being here in a world that keeps breaking its own. But I built this place to fight smart, not to fight brave. That's still the plan. I'm not planning on being a hero. I'm planning on being useful and coming back. It's not the comfort a 12-year-old wants, but it's honest. And something in her face settles slightly for having gotten honesty instead of a lie dressed up kindly. She doesn't say anything else. She just leans into my shoulder for a moment, Kuro's weight pressing against both our legs, and for a handful of seconds the 3 of us are just still in a stairwell. In the last quiet the tower is likely to get for a while. The lookout's voice cuts through that stillness less than an hour later, calling down from the roof access in a tone that doesn't need translation. By the time I reach the top, 3 others are already there, staring out at the horizon where a scattered line of shapes has resolved out of the haze rafts, more than the 6 that hit the hive. Cutting a course that isn't wandering or searching, it's direct, precise, bearing straight for us along the shortest possible line across open water, the way a man moves through a building he's already been given the floor plan to. "They're not scouting," Takeru says beside me, voice flat with the particular calm that comes right before he stops being calm at all. "They're not even hesitating. They know exactly where we are and exactly how to get here. I don't say anything because there's nothing left to say that isn't already sitting heavy in every chest on that rooftop. 2 nights of stolen time, spent on a plan that was never going to be a secret the moment it mattered most. Kuro, beside Hana at the roof access door, isn't growling this time. He's just staring out at the horizon, dead still, the same way he stared at a locked shaft door weeks ago, right before we learned exactly what kind of trouble had already found its way inside. They come in through the second-floor loading dock, exactly the way Ichiro described it to whoever was listening on the other end of that hidden transmitter. Bypassing the collapsed stairwell we'd rigged to funnel attackers into a choke point, bypassing the trip lines Daiichi strung across the 8th-floor landing 2 nights ago. Moving through the one gap in our defenses that only someone with inside knowledge could have found. By the time the first shout goes up, they're already 3 floors in. They know the building, Takeru says, and there's no surprise in his voice, only confirmation of the thing we've all been dreading since we found Ichiro kneeling beside that transmitter. Ren, get the low floors evacuated, everyone who can't fight up and back toward the paddock rooms behind the stairwell we sealed off last week. That leaves you and your people holding the loading dock corridor alone. That's the plan, he says, already moving, already pulling 2 of his best toward the stairwell down. You built this building to fail in specific, controlled ways when it has to. I'm the one who's spent 20 years being the thing that fails last so other people don't have to. There isn't time to argue the math of it, even though every part of me wants to. I go. The evacuation is its own kind of chaos, Mia directing the wounded and the very young through corridors we mapped for exactly this scenario 3 days ago. Daiichi sealing off side passages behind each group as they clear them, using the same shaft system Osamu once used to hide from us. Now repurposed to hide 70 people from something far worse than a desperate man with a knife. Hana moves with a calm that unsettles me more than panic would, Kuro pressed against her side the entire way, snarling at every doorway before anyone else even registers a threat behind it. I hear the fighting before I see it a corridor away, then closer. The specific ugly sound of metal on metal, of voices raised in something that isn't quite a battle cry and isn't quite a scream. Just the raw noise of people trying to survive an encounter none of them chose. When I round the final corner toward the loading dock choke point, the scene that greets me is worse than anything I built in my head preparing for this. Harpoon is there personally, exactly as Ichiro's information must have promised, moving through Takeru's line with the same unhurried, economical violence I watched him use on the Hive's platform 3 weeks ago. He's not rushing. He doesn't need to. Every second he spends here is a second his people spend pushing further into a building that was never going to hold against someone who already knows its floor plan. Takeru is the only thing standing between him and the corridor leading toward where I've just finished moving 40 of our people to safety. "Ren!" Takeru shouts the moment he sees me, not taking his eyes off Harpoon for even the half second it would cost him. The others clear? Almost. 2 more groups still on 9, then get back there and finish it. This corridor holds until they do. I don't move immediately, and something in my hesitation must show on my face, because Takeru's expression shifts not softer exactly, but direct. The way it gets right before he says something he means completely. "This is the thing I'm actually good at," he says. "You built the maze. I'm the wall at the end of it. Let me be that." Harpoon watches this exchange with something that might almost be interest. Weapon loose in his hand, patient the way a man is patient when he already believes he's won. "Your engineer again?" he says, almost fondly, like he's greeting an old acquaintance. "I did wonder if we'd meet again before this was finished. Your friend's about to find out that a good wall's only as good as what's willing to break itself against it." "Go," Takeru says again, and this time it isn't a request. I go. The last group on 9 is slower than it should be, an elderly woman who can't manage the stairs quickly, a child too frightened to move without someone carrying him, and every second I spend here is a second I can't spend anywhere else. A second that stretches out with the specific, unbearable elasticity of time during the parts of a crisis where nothing you do feels fast enough. We clear the floor. I get them through the sealed passage Daiichi's holding open. Count heads, confirm the number against the list I've kept updated obsessively for 3 days, and only then, only once every civilian in this building is somewhere behind a barrier we control, do I let myself turn back toward the loading dock corridor. I'm too late by the time I get there, though it takes me a moment to understand exactly how late, because the corridor is quiet in a way that's worse than the noise was. Takeru is on the ground near the choke point, and the 2 people who were fighting beside him are pulling back through the stairwell behind me, wounded, carrying what they can. The corridor beyond him is empty. Harpoon and his men are gone, retreated the way they came, taking whatever they managed to grab from the second-floor stores on their way through trophies, not a full raid, not the devastation I braced for, which somehow makes it worse. because it means this was never meant to be the whole assault. It was a probe, a reminder, a message written in exactly what it cost us. I reach Takeru and understand immediately, from the way he's positioned, from the amount of blood already pooling beneath him on the concrete, that there isn't a version of the next few minutes where triage changes the outcome. "They clear?" he asks, and his voice is steadier than it has any right to be. "All of them. Every floor. Everyone's behind the line." Something in his face eases at that, the specific relief of a man confirming the one thing he actually needed to know before anything else mattered. "Good," he says. "Good." A pause. Breath catching wrong. "Ren, listen to me. Save it. Mia's coming, she's..." "Listen to me," he says again, and there's enough force left in it that I stop talking. "You were right back on the first day. About the floor. About reading this building instead of just walking it. A ghost of something that might, in a different moment, have been a smile. I spent 3 weeks thinking I was the thing keeping these people alive. I wasn't wrong exactly. I just wasn't the only version of right." He grips my wrist, weaker than I expect, stronger than I want it to be. "They're going to need someone to think after this, not just fight. You've been doing both since the day I met you, and you didn't even notice you were doing it." "Takeru, take care of them," he says, and it isn't a request either, the same as his order at the choke point wasn't a request. "All of them. That's the job now. It was always going to end up being yours. I just didn't want to admit it while I still had the chance to be the one holding the wall." Mia arrives seconds later, already moving into the motions of triage before she's fully processed what she's seeing, and I watch her hands do everything they're trained to do. Fast and skilled and utterly, uselessly too late for the wound in front of her. She knows it before she finishes checking. I can see it settle into her shoulders even as she keeps working, because stopping isn't something either of us can afford to do first. Takeru doesn't say anything else. He doesn't need to. He watches the corridor a moment longer, the one he held, the one that's empty now because he held it, and then he isn't watching anything at all. The silence afterward is the kind that has weight to it. Physical, pressing down on the corridor the way water presses down on the flooded lower floors none of us can reach anymore. Daiichi arrives a minute later, takes in the scene in a single look, and doesn't say a word, just stands beside me, close enough that I understand it's meant as support rather than distance. Word moves through the tower the way it always does, faster than anyone intends it to, and by the time I've stood up from beside Takeru's body, people are already gathering at the edges of the corridor, not crowding in, held back by some instinct for what this moment needs, just present, watching, waiting to understand what happens next. I think about the first day, Takeru sizing me up in a stairwell, filing me somewhere below himself on a scale I didn't fully understand yet. I think about the corridor floor on the 9th level, the crack I read before it gave way, the recalibration that started that day and never quite finished until right now, in the worst possible way. With him on the ground and the choice about what comes next sitting entirely, undeniably, on me. There's no vote this time. No meeting, no raised hands, no room split between two men with two different kinds of confidence. There's just 70 people looking at the only person left who understands both what this building is capable of and what it's going to take to survive whatever the Tide King sends next. Because a probe like this one only means one thing, that the real assault is still coming, bigger and soon. He held that corridor alone, I say, to the gathered crowd, to Daiichi, to Mia still kneeling beside the body of a man who spent 3 weeks arguing with me about almost everything, and died making sure every single word of that argument stayed relevant for the people it was actually about. He held it because he understood something I'm only now catching up to. This building isn't going to defend itself. It's not going to survive on walls and traps alone, and it's not going to survive on courage alone either. It needs both, working together, or what happened to Osamu, what just happened to Takeru, is going to keep happening until there's nobody left to hold anything. I look around the corridor, at faces exhausted past the point of easy fear, at Hana standing near the back with Kuro pressed against her leg, watching me with an expression that isn't quite grief yet because grief hasn't fully arrived, just the wide, waiting stillness of a child absorbing the shape of the world changing again. They're coming back, I say, bigger, next time. This wasn't the real assault. This was them finding out exactly how much it costs to test us. I take a breath, and for the first time since I woke up alone on that roof, I say the thing plainly, without hedging it in half measures or shared decisions. I'm not going to pretend I can do what Takeru did. I can't hold a corridor with my hands. But I can make sure the next corridor they try to walk through costs them everything they have, and the one after that costs them more, until there isn't a version of taking this building that's worth it to them anymore. That's the plan now. That's the only plan there is. Nobody argues. Nobody raises a hand in a vote that isn't happening. The silence that answers me is its own kind of consent, heavier than any show of hands could be, and I understand. Standing over the body of the man who spent 3 weeks insisting that strength and thought were two different currencies, that the tower has just, without a single word of debate, decided they don't have to be. We bury Takaru at sea, the only way this world allows anyone to be buried anymore, on the second morning after the loading dock, with the whole tower gathered on the widest stretch of the second-floor platform, because nowhere else could hold everyone who wanted to be there. There isn't much ceremony to build with. No priest, no proper words prepared in advance, just 70 exhausted people standing in gray morning light around a body wrapped in what fabric we could spare, and me standing closest. Because somehow that's become my job now, whether I asked for it or not. I didn't know him a month ago, I say, and my voice doesn't come out as steady as I want it to, which feels right, somehow, more honest than steady would have been. None of us knew each other a month ago. We woke up in this building as strangers, and the only reason any of us are still breathing is because people like him decided that didn't matter, that a stranger standing next to you in a stairwell was worth protecting anyway. Before there was any proof it would be returned. I look at the water, at the gray shape of him settling under it. He held a corridor by himself, so 40 people he'd known for 3 weeks could keep being people instead of casualties. I don't have a way to make that make sense. I just have a way to make sure it wasn't for nothing. Nobody claps. Nobody's supposed to. Mia stands near the front with her hand resting on Hana's shoulder. And Hana doesn't cry the way I expect her to, just watches the water with Kuro pressed against her side. Still and quiet in the specific way she's learned these last 3 weeks, a kind of stillness no 12-year-old should have had to learn this fast. Daichi stands a little apart, arms crossed, jaw tight, and I understand without him saying anything that this is as close as he comes to grief he'll let anyone see. Nobody talks about numbers. Nobody mentions the fleet or the tribute or what comes next. For 20 minutes, the tower is just people, standing together, letting a loss be a loss before it has to become a strategy again. It becomes a strategy again by that afternoon, because it has to. And because I understand now, in a way I didn't fully let myself understand before Takaru died holding a corridor alone, that grief and preparation aren't actually opposites. They're the same instinct wearing different clothes, the same refusal to let this building lose one more person to a fight it could have won with better planning. I spend the rest of that day and most of the night walking every floor I have access to, not looking for threats this time, but looking for weapons. The same way I once looked for water catchment and safe walking surfaces. The building has been teaching me its own vocabulary since the morning I woke up on the roof. And it's time I finally spoke it back with intent. The flooded technical floors, 16 through 18, sit above the waterline by inches, held back by service doors that were never meant to be watertight, just weather-resistant. If those doors could be rigged to release fast and hard instead of failing slowly the way the 9th floor slab did, they wouldn't just leak. They'd dump tons of standing water down through the open stairwell shaft directly onto anything below. At exactly the moment attackers would be funneling through the lower choke points Ichiro already gave away. The elevator shafts, dead since the day I woke up, still carry their original cables, thick, load-rated steel, coiled uselessly in machine rooms nobody's touched since the flood. Cut loose and counterweighted right, released from height with a controlled drop, they become something closer to a ram than a decoration, and I already know exactly which corridor gives the clearest fall line. The greenhouse's biogas lines, the ones Daichi rigged weeks ago to help power the grow lamps on nights the generator's resting, run through pipe joints that were never meant to handle pressure beyond their intended use, which means, with the right valve work, they can be made to fail somewhere specific, releasing something flammable exactly where and when we choose. None of it is decoration. All of it is the building itself, turned from shelter into something that fights back on our terms instead of theirs. "You want me to reach the hive?" Daichi says the next morning, when I lay out the rest of the plan, the part that isn't traps. The part I've been circling since Takaru's funeral, without quite admitting to myself how much it matters. And what exactly? Tell them to send people to die with us? Tell them the Tide King's fleet is coming back for a full assault, and that if he takes this tower, the hive is next on a list that already has both our names on it, I say. Tell them we're not asking for an army. We're asking for anyone willing to send warning if they spot the fleet moving early, anyone willing to trade materials for defense, anyone who understands that the only way any of these small arcs survive him long-term is if we stop being 70 separate problems for him to solve one at a time. Daichi studies me a long moment, and something in his expression shifts, not quite surprise, more like watching a piece finally slot into a shape he'd been half expecting. "You're not just building a defense," he says. "You're trying to build the thing none of us have had since the water came up. An actual alliance. I'm trying to build the thing that survives past this one fight, I say. A tower that wins today and stands alone tomorrow just gets tested again next month, and eventually loses. Osamu and Takeru don't get to be the last two names on that list if I can help it. He doesn't argue. He spends the rest of the day at his radio rig instead, patient in a way that reminds me, uncomfortably, of the patience it takes to coax a fragile signal out of static reaching Reyes and Merrick at the Hive first. Then two smaller, more distant arcs whose broadcasts we've picked up over the weeks but never answered, laying the first thin wires of something that might, if it holds, become more than 70 people standing alone against a king. Not everyone in the tower is ready to trust the direction I'm taking things, and the resistance finds its clearest voice 2 days before the fleet's expected return, in a meeting that starts, ostensibly about ration allocation, and doesn't stay there long. We buried a man 3 days ago who could actually fight. One of Ichiro's old allies says a broad-shouldered man named Voss who ran security shifts under Takeru and has made no secret of his opinion since. And now we're taking orders from the one person in this building who's never held a real weapon in his life. No offense meant. But when that fleet arrives, I want to know who's actually standing at the front of this tower, and it isn't supposed to be an engineer. There's a current of agreement in parts of the room, quiet but real. The specific fear-driven logic that mistakes physical presence for safety, even after physical presence already failed to save the Hive. I understand the instinct. I even sympathize with it. It just isn't correct, and I've learned by now that the only way to answer fear with something other than more fear is with something concrete. You're right that I've never held a real weapon, I say, not raising my voice, not matching the challenge in his. I'm not going to pretend that's not true, or that it doesn't matter. But ask yourself what actually held that corridor long enough to save 40 people 3 days ago. It wasn't just Takeru's strength. It was a choke point I designed months, weeks before that corridor ever mattered, that gave him a place worth dying to hold instead of an open floor that would have swallowed him in 30 seconds. I unroll the plan I've spent 2 days building the flood release on 16 through 18. The elevator ram, the biogas lines, marked in Daiichi's careful hand on salvaged paper. Every trap keyed to a specific point in the building's actual structure. This is what I'm offering instead of a fist. Every person in this building, fighter or not, is going to matter in what happens next, because this plan doesn't work with strength alone, and it doesn't work with caution alone. It works because every piece of this building becomes a weapon at the exact moment we need it to be won. And that only works if someone spent the time understanding the building well enough to know where those moments are. Voss doesn't have an answer to the plan itself because there isn't one to give no counter-proposal. No alternative built on anything sturdier than the same instinct that already got the Hive nearly overrun and got Takeru killed holding a corridor he was never going to survive alone. The room's mood shifts, not all at once, but visibly, the way a scale tips once enough weight settles on one side. Nobody's replacing what Takeru did, I add, quieter now, because this part matters more than winning an argument. I'm not trying to be him. I'm trying to make sure the next person who has to hold a line like that isn't doing it because the rest of us failed to build something better first. Voss doesn't apologize, doesn't concede out loud, but he doesn't push the challenge further either, and by the time the meeting breaks, the authority I picked up without a vote 3 days ago has hardened into something closer to consensus, not because I proved I could fight, but because I proved, plainly, in front of the people who doubted it most, that I could think this building into surviving what's coming. The warning comes 2 mornings later, not from the roof lookout this time, but from Kuro, who wakes the entire 8th floor landing before dawn with a low, continuous growl aimed at nothing any of us can see, pacing the length of the corridor with his hackles raised in a way Hana's never seen before, not even the night we found Osamu. By the time full light breaks, the roof lookout confirms what the dog already knew. The fleet is moving not scattered rafts on a testing run this time, but a real formation, more vessels than the 6 that hit the Hive, more than the group that probed our loading dock, cutting a direct, deliberate line across open water toward the tower with the same confident certainty as before, the same knowledge of exactly where to go. Daiichi's radio crackles within the hour, Reia's voice coming through thin but clear, the Hive's own lookouts confirming the same sighting from their side of the current. The fleet's course angled unmistakably toward us and not toward them. They're not testing anymore, Daiichi says, standing beside me on the roof, watching the horizon fill in with shapes that used to be just a rumor of danger and are now, unmistakably, a fact bearing down on all 70 of us at once. This is the real one. I look out at the water, at the traps built into a building I've spent 5 weeks learning to read like a second language. And for the first time since I woke up alone on this roof with nothing but a bent pipe and a tarp, I don't feel unprepared. I feel like a man standing at the exact center of a plan he's finally ready to test. Then let's make sure it's the last one, I say. And somewhere behind me, Kuro finally stops growling and goes still, watching the horizon the way the rest of us are, waiting for the fleet to come close enough for the building itself to answer. The fleet reaches us at midday, under a flat white sky that gives the water nowhere to hide anything, and for the first time I get a real count instead of a guess. Over 30 vessels, rafts and reinforced boats, and one larger craft near the center of the formation that rides higher than the rest, flying a strip of red cloth from a makeshift mast. I don't need Daichi to tell me who's on that one. Positions, I call down through the stairwell relay we rigged for exactly this moment, and the word passes floor to floor faster than I expect. 70 people who buried a man 3 days ago now moving with a grim, practiced calm that wasn't there a month ago. Mia and the youngest, oldest, and most wounded are already sealed behind the paddock rooms on the upper floors. The same evacuation route we used during the loading dock raid, this time rehearsed instead of improvised. Daichi is at the technical floor controls, hand on the release mechanism for 16 through 18, watching the approach through a gap in the boarded windows. I'm at the central relay point where every line of sight in this plan converges, because a trap only works if someone's watching the whole board instead of just their own piece of it. They come in through the loading dock again, the same breach Ichiro's information handed them. The same route that killed Takeru because it's the fastest way in, and because whoever's leading this wave has no reason yet to suspect we've spent 3 days rebuilding that exact weakness into something else entirely. The first wave of boats crowds the flooded ground floor entrance, 12 craft pushing in close together in the narrow approach, exactly the bottleneck I designed the release timing around. I give the signal the moment the last boat clears the outer threshold. Daichi throws the release. The sound is enormous, 3 floors of standing water given somewhere to go all at once, tons of it crashing down through the open stairwell shaft, directly onto the crowded approach below. A sound like the building itself exhaling after weeks of holding its breath. Boats capsize, men go into water that's been standing dark and cold for weeks. The tight formation that made the loading dock a fast route in becomes, in 4 seconds, a chaotic scramble that costs them their momentum and half their forward wave before a single blade has been drawn on either side. "First wave's broken," Daichi shouts, voice tight with something that isn't quite triumph yet, more the focused relief of a plan performing exactly as designed. They're regrouping on the platform, trying to find another way in. They find it because Ichiro's information was thorough and the building only has so many doors, but the second approach runs them straight through the elevator shaft corridor, and this time it's my hand on the release. The cable drop isn't subtle, thick steel, counterweighted, released from 6 floors up with nothing to slow it until it meets the men crowding the narrow hallway below. It isn't clean. It isn't meant to be. It breaks their formation exactly the way the flood broke the first wave, and the corridor that was supposed to be their fast route to the stores becomes, instead, another cost they didn't plan on paying. I catch sight of him partway through the third push, tall, unhurried, stepping over the wreckage of the elevator ram with the same casual confidence I remember from the Hive's platform, Harpoon, directing the third wave personally now that the first 2 have stalled, clearly irritated but not yet worried, the expression of a man who still believes the outcome isn't in question. "Cute," he calls out, loud enough to carry, apparently unbothered that anyone might be listening close enough to hear him. Water traps, falling cables, your engineer's been busy playing with his toys. He steps past one of his own wounded without looking down, moving toward the greenhouse level access, where the biogas lines run thick through the walls behind cheap paneling that wouldn't fool anyone who actually stopped to look. I'll give him this much. It slowed us down more than I expected from a man who's never held a real weapon in his life. He doesn't stop to look. Because stopping to look isn't something Harpoon does. I understood that about him the moment I watched him walk through a collapsing gangway at the Hive without breaking stride. The specific, fatal confidence of a man who's never once needed to check whether the ground under him is what it appears to be. I'm already at the valve when his group reaches the greenhouse corridor. "He's at the junction," Daichi says over the relay line, voice low and urgent. "Ren, that's the exact spot. I know exactly where he is." I open the valve. The biogas doesn't explode the way movies taught all of us to expect explosions to look. It's faster and uglier than that, a rush of flame down a line that was never meant to hold pressure, catching everything combustible in the narrow corridor at once, and Harpoon mid-sentence, mid-stride, still looking at the greenhouse door instead of the walls around him, doesn't have the half-second of warning that might have let a more careful man get clear. It's over before the sound of it finishes echoing down the stairwell. When the smoke clears enough to see, the corridor is empty of anything that used to be a threat. I don't feel triumphant standing at that valve. I feel something colder and steadier, the exact sensation I remember from the 9th floor slab, from the gangway at the Hive, the specific, unglamorous certainty of understanding a structure well enough to know precisely where it wants to fail, and choosing, deliberately, to make that failure someone else's problem instead of ours. Harpoon dismissed this building as a collection of an engineer's toys, right up until one of those toys became the last thing he ever underestimated. The fourth wave is smaller, hesitant in a way the first three weren't, and I understand why the moment Daiichi's relay crackles with news from the roof lookout. Rafts on the horizon, moving fast. Not part of the Tide King's fleet. Reyes's voice comes through moments later on the radio, breathless, the Hive's own defenders closing on the fleet's rear flank exactly as promised. Drawn by the warning we sent 2 days ago, and the alliance Daiichi spent a week building out of static and cautious trust. It isn't a large force. It doesn't need to be. It's enough to turn a fleet that's already lost momentum, already lost its most feared enforcer, into something that suddenly has to defend its own flank instead of pressing an attack that was supposed to be a formality. The cost isn't zero on our side. Voss, the man who challenged my leadership 2 days ago, who never fully trusted the plan even after the meeting turned against him, takes a wound holding the second-floor line that Mia works over for 20 frantic minutes before the bleeding finally slows. And one of the younger residents, a boy barely out of his teens who volunteered for relay duty because he wanted to matter to something, doesn't survive the collapse of the elevator corridor at all. I don't let myself process either loss fully in the moment because the fight isn't finished, and grief that stops a plan mid-execution costs more lives than it honors. The Tide King himself comes ashore only once the outcome is no longer in doubt. Once his fleet has scattered under the combined pressure of a building that fights back and a Hive detachment closing from behind not out of cowardice, I understand later. But because a man who built an empire on other people's fear doesn't lead from the front, he arrives to collect the spoils of a victory his subordinates were supposed to secure for him first. He finds instead a corridor full of his own drowned and burned men, no spoils, no harpoon, and Daichi and me waiting at the greenhouse threshold with the last working length of elevator cable coiled and ready in Daichi's hands. He's older than his voice suggested over the radio, weathered in the specific way of a man who spent a life on boats before the water rose to swallow everything else, and when he sees the corridor, sees what's left of his third wave, something in his face goes through several stages at once. Disbelief, calculation, and finally, slowly, something that looks almost like respect he clearly resents having to feel. "You're the engineer," he says. "Not a question. I'm the man whose building just cost you your best enforcer and half your fleet," I say. "Yes, that too." He looks around at the corridor once more, weighing something, and I watch him arrive at the same conclusion I've watched cross other faces in this building over the past 5 weeks. Reyes, Marek, Takeru, Voss, the specific, involuntary recalibration of someone realizing the person in front of them isn't what they assumed. "Kill me then," he says. Flat, not pleading, just stating what he clearly believes is the only remaining move on the board. "You've earned it twice over. I'd have done the same in your place, and worse, given the chance." Daiichi's grip tightens on the cable, waiting for a word from me that would end this exactly the way the Tide King expects it to end. I don't give it. "Killing you doesn't get me anything I actually need," I say instead. "It gets me a dead king and a fleet of leaderless men with no reason not to come back angrier and less organized than before. What I need is for this water to stop being a place where every tower has to choose between starving alone or bleeding under someone else's tribute schedule." I nod at the wreckage around us, at the corridor his own confidence walked him into. "You built an empire because you convinced yourself it was the only alternative to chaos. I'm offering you a different alternative. Not submission, not tribute. An alliance built on the same thing that just cost you your fleet towers working together instead of towers being picked off one at a time." The Tide King stares at me a long moment, and something in his expression shifts from a man braced for execution to a man doing arithmetic he clearly hadn't expected to need. "You'd trust a truce with the man who sent Harpoon to your door," he says. "I don't trust you," I say honestly. "I trust that a man who's just lost his enforcer, half his fleet, and the fear that used to do most of his negotiating for him doesn't have many better options left than the one I'm offering. That's not friendship. That's just what's true right now, for both of us." The silence stretches long enough that I genuinely don't know which way it's going to break, and somewhere behind me I'm aware of Daichi still holding the cable, of the Hive's people arriving at the platform edge, of 70 exhausted survivors watching from the stairwell to see how their engineer handles the one moment in this entire siege where a wrong choice could undo everything the building just fought to hold. "Shaky terms," the Tide King finally says, "for a shaky peace. I'm not going to pretend I like this, or you, or the position you've put me in." He looks at the wreckage of his own fleet one more time, at what's left of the power he spent months building, but I've built enough of an empire to know when the arithmetic's turned against me. Terms then, I'll hear them. It isn't triumph, standing there in a corridor that still smells of smoke and floodwater, watching a man who terrorized every small arc on this ocean agree, grudgingly, pragmatically, to something other than war. It's something quieter and heavier than triumph, the specific, unglamorous weight of a plan that worked exactly as well as it needed to, at exactly the cost it needed to cost. No more and no less than the price this ocean has decided everything is worth now. Behind me, faint through the ruined corridor, I hear Kuro barking somewhere near the stairwell. Not the low growl of warning this time, but something looser, something almost like relief. And I let myself, for the first time in 5 weeks, believe that the worst of it might actually be behind us. The cleanup takes the better part of 2 weeks, and somewhere in the middle of hauling wreckage, patching flooded corridors, and counting a headcount that's grown instead of shrunk for the first time since I woke up here, I stop thinking of it as recovery and start thinking of it as construction. We're not just fixing what broke. We're building something the old version of this tower never was. The numbers tell part of the story, the part I still can't stop myself from tallying, the old habit from the roof that never quite left me. 70 scattered survivors, alone on 40 separate floors, 5 weeks ago. Now, our own community grown past 90 with the addition of a dozen of the Tide King's former crew who chose to stay rather than follow him back to a Leviathan with half its fleet gone. Plus a standing arrangement with the Hive that stopped being a wary trade relationship and turned into something closer to family Reyes and Merrick's people rotating through for weeks at a stretch. Ours doing the same in return, until nobody quite remembers which tower somebody originally woke up on. Was 70 strangers hiding from each other in stairwells? Is close to 130 people who know each other's names, and who buried 2 of their own together instead of separately. The Tide King, I still don't know if I should call him that or something smaller. Now that most of what made the title frightening burned in a greenhouse corridor keeps to the terms he agreed to at gunpoint that first week. And something in the keeping surprises me more than the terms themselves did. He doesn't linger near Medora often. He splits his time between the wreck of the Leviathan and the growing web of smaller arcs that have started reaching out since word spread of a tower that beat him and then chose not to gloat about it. I don't trust him the way I trust Daiichi or Mia. I don't think I ever will. But I've stopped needing to, because trust was never actually the thing holding this fragile piece together. Arithmetic was, and arithmetic hasn't changed. Mia's role never had a formal title, but by the second week after the siege, nobody in either tower calls her anything but the one who decides what happens when someone's hurt badly enough that panic starts making decisions for people. She's expanded the medical stores twice, once through trade with the Hive, once through a scavenging run into a flooded section of Medora nobody had fully mapped until Voss, recovering, mentioned in passing that he remembered a pharmacy on the ground floor before the water came up. She trained 2 of the younger residents to assist her, patient in exactly the way the job demands. And when I catch her some evenings sitting at the edge of the greenhouse with her hands finally still, I understand that whatever she lost in the life before this one, she's built something here that's hers in a way the old life might never have let her have. You look tired, I tell her once, half a joke because she always looks tired now, the specific exhausted satisfaction of someone doing exactly the work she's meant for. Good tired, she says, which is the only answer she ever gives, and the only one that's ever actually true. Daiichi doesn't ask for a title either. But by the time the second week ends, everyone in the tower has started routing decisions through both of us, without anyone formally deciding that's how it should work. He handles the Alliance's radio network personally now, a growing web of frequencies connecting Medora, the Hive, and 3 smaller arcs that reached out once word of the siege's outcome finished traveling across the water. He's the one who catches the first real signs of trouble before I do, half the time. Because he's spent so many nights listening to this ocean static that he's started to hear the shape of things in it, the way I once learned to read cracks in concrete. You know, you basically run half of this place now? I tell him one night, both of us checking wiring on the expanded greenhouse array. Because we've doubled the growing beds since the siege and the lighting rig needs more hands than his alone. Somebody has to keep the engineer from getting too proud of himself, he says, not looking up from the wire he's stripping, and it's as close as Daiichi ever gets to saying something warm out loud. I've learned to hear it anyway. Hana is the change I notice most, because I watched the fear settle into her that night before the siege. Watched her ask me not to fight with a rawness that told me exactly how much this tower had already cost her by then. She doesn't ask that anymore. She still worries I catch it sometimes. A held breath when I'm late back from a supply run. A hand that finds Kuro's fur a little too fast when the radio crackles unexpectedly, but the fear doesn't run the show the way it did. She's taken to helping Daiichi with the radio work. a natural patience for it that surprises both of them. And she started teaching two younger children who came over with the hive's rotating families, showing them which floors are safe the way I once showed her, small and matter-of-fact. Like it's just something people do for each other now. You're basically an engineer too at this point, I tell her one afternoon, watching her explain load paths to a 6-year-old with more patience than I had at 12, let alone now. Boring superpower, she says, echoing my own words back at me with a small, genuine grin. Keeps people fed. Kuro, for his part, has become something between a mascot and an early warning system for the entire alliance, known now on both towers by name, greeted at the hive's platform with the kind of familiarity usually reserved for old friends. He doesn't growl much anymore. Mostly he just watches, ears up, content, the specific stillness of an animal who's finally decided the danger has receded enough to rest. It's during the cleanup of the greenhouse corridor, the one the biogas line ran through, still scorched black along one wall, that I find the thing that changes how I understand everything that's happened since the roof. The wall took real damage in the fire, enough that a section of concrete near the base has cracked away entirely. And underneath it, where a normal building would show rebar and aggregate, there's something else. A cluster of pale, fibrous material. Dense and faintly warm to the touch even 5 weeks after I first noticed similar growths holding the tower's structure together during the storm on day 1. I've walked past traces of this material a dozen times since I woke up here, always assuming, the way an engineer assumes when the alternative is too strange to sit with, that it was some kind of organic growth, a byproduct of the flood, incidental. It isn't incidental. Up close, in the light, I can see its structured fibers running in deliberate patterns, nodes at regular intervals, something between biology and architecture that no flood produced by accident. And at the center of the exposed cluster, faint but unmistakable, there's a symbol pressed into the material itself, geometric, precise. The same pattern radio operators across this stretch of ocean have spent weeks calling the eye the source of the low, repeating signal. Every current in this water seems to be quietly, patiently carrying us toward. Daichi finds me still crouched there an hour later, and doesn't say anything for a long moment after I show him what I found. That's not natural, he says finally, echoing my own thought back at me the way he's started to do more often these days. No, I agree. It's not. We don't call an emergency meeting. There's no panic left in either of us to spend on it, not after everything the last 5 weeks have already asked us to survive. Instead, over the following days, quietly, we share what we found with Reyes, with Marek, with the handful of smaller arcs now trading information across Daiichi's growing radio network. And the picture that comes together isn't the one I braced for. The drift was never an accident. Whatever pulled entire blocks of cities, buildings, and all into this ocean and stripped the memory of the moment from everyone it carried, did it with intent. The stabilizing growths, the currents, the signal every arc on this water has been unconsciously following since the first day any of us opened our eyes on a rooftop or a stairwell or a flooded office floor. Someone or something built this world to carry us somewhere specific. It should terrify me. Some part of it does, in the small hours, the same way any unanswered question about a structure I can't fully map used to keep me up staring at blueprints in the life before. But mostly, standing in that scorched corridor with Daichi beside me, I feel something closer to relief than fear. The specific relief of finally understanding the shape of a problem I've been circling since the first morning I stood at this tower's railing and decided. The drift wasn't random. It isn't a threat waiting to reveal itself. It's an answer, finally arrived, to the only question that's mattered since before I even had allies to share it with. The decision, when it comes, isn't made in fear and isn't made alone. It's made in a meeting that fills the widest platform on Medora's second floor, the same space where we buried Takaru, now crowded with representatives from the Hive, a handful of the Tide King's former crew, delegates from the smaller arcs that have joined the growing network these last weeks, more people in one place than I've seen since I woke up on that roof. And none of them here, because they're afraid. We know now the current isn't carrying us by accident, I tell the gathered crowd, Daichi beside me, Mia and Hana near the front, Kuro sitting calm at Hana's feet. Someone built this ocean, this drift, this signal, on purpose. We don't know who or fully why, not yet. What we do know is that fighting each other for scraps while we're all being carried toward the same point anyway was never going to be the answer. It just cost us people we didn't need to lose. I look around the room, Reyes, arms crossed, but listening the way she's listened since the column crack first earned her trust. Marek, nodding slow, the Tide King's old crew, uncertain but present, choosing this room over the wreck of an empire that no longer means what it used to. I'm not asking anyone to follow the signal blindly, I say. I'm asking that instead of scattering, instead of going back to towers guarding tribute against each other, we go together. Whatever's at the source of that signal, we meet it as an alliance instead of 70 separate desperate towers. And along the way, every small arc we find gets the same offer the Hive got from us: tools, not tribute. Partnership, not a price. Nobody argues, not really, not the way rooms used to argue in the tower's first fearful weeks. The agreement that settles over the platform isn't unanimous enthusiasm. Some faces stay wary, some arms stay crossed, but it's real, chosen. The specific quiet consent of people who've already survived enough together to trust the next hard thing more than they trust going it alone. That evening, I climb back up to the roof, the same one I woke up on 5 weeks ago, soaked and alone and certain the world had ended without leaving me any instructions. It hasn't ended. It's just become something else. The running track is still cracked in the same places. The tennis net still sags the way it did that first morning. But the gym behind me glows warm through its cracked glass wall, rows of green thriving under lamps that never stop humming now, fed by more hands than Daiichi's alone. Mia finds a spot near the railing without being asked, the way she has most evenings since the siege. Daiichi climbs up a few minutes later, already talking through tomorrow's radio schedule before he's even fully through the hatch, because some habits never really rest. Hana arrives last, Kuro trotting ahead of her the way he always does now, and she doesn't hesitate at the edge of the roof the way I remember her hesitating at edges in the tower's first fearful days. She just walks straight to the railing and looks out, unafraid, at a horizon that used to mean nothing but danger and now means the direction we've chosen to go. I think about the man who woke up here soaked, alone, certain he was a puddle 2 meters wide, evaporating in a world with no explanations. I think about how far that man has come to stand in this exact spot again, this time with a lake behind him instead of a puddle, an army instead of an accident of survival. Quite a view, Mia says, coming to stand beside me, watching the same horizon Hana's watching, the same one Daiichi's already half planning tomorrow's route across. It's not the view I woke up to, I say. No, she agrees, it's better. Kuro settles at our feet, content, watching the water the way he's watched it every evening since the fighting stopped. Somewhere below us, the tower hums with 130 lives instead of 70 scattered ones. And somewhere out past the horizon, carried by a current that finally has a name and a purpose, whatever's waiting at the source of the signal is still waiting. We'll meet it together, when we're ready. Not as a puddle evaporating in a desert of water, as a lake with an army and nowhere left to hide from what it's already become.